Wow. Welcome, 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 everybody. It is the 18th day of British Columbia's election campaign, and it is perhaps the most exciting day because today is the only televised debate from the three leaders competing. That would be the incumbent Premier David Eby of the NDP party. Then you have John Rusted, leader of the Conservative Party of BC, and Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau. And Sheila Gunn Reid is joining me from the West. Hopefully, BC can become like Alberta soon. But thanks for being on the live. It's going to be fun. And how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm actually very excited. Normally, I'm relatively disgusted by what happens in BC politics. However, not the last 2 years, because it's shades of progressivism fighting over the center and the far left. That's all it is in British Columbia, and it disaffects voters. But you have John Rustad, who managed to cannibalize the other right of center party by what? Being an actual conservative, taking a few notes from the premier here in Alberta, Danielle Smith. If you are conservative, conservatives will vote for you. And if you talk about conservative ideas, you might just win over some liberals who are tired of paying too much for everything. And that's what's happening at the federal level. So it's great to see what John Rustad is doing. And he is saying all the right things. I'm very hopeful for the people of British Columbia. You might just have a conservative government after almost 100 years.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's been at least 70 years since this happened. We've had the center-right parties. We're going to dive into that a little bit more, I think. But let's get some housekeeping rules for those who are tuning in. Make sure you tell your friends and families as well that this is the place to be as far as watching the debate, which starts in about an hour. But before that, we're going to have some special guests. We're going to talk about the latest with the polls. We're going to talk about some of the smear campaigns that's been going on. So it's going to be a fun time starting now. And if you want to be a part of this, you can do that too. You can head over to rumble.com because we tell the other side of the story, has demonetized us on there and makes it difficult for us to chat with you and be supported. So if you go to Rumble and you watch the stream, you can go ahead and engage in live chats. Let us know what you're thinking as well, and we'll give some notes. And of course, if you'd like to donate to keep the lights on, those donations, I think it's $5 or more. We try to read those throughout the show as well. And I think that's it. So you were talking about how long it's been in British Columbia, and you're right, it has been so long. There was the Conservative Party, and then, oh my gosh, what's his name? Bennett? I think his name was Bennett.
Yeah.
Where he kind of crossed over and went to the Social Credit Party, which was sort of like a center-right kind of thing. So BC's done this thing where it goes back and forth between center-right and the left, and now it might be going to the right.
Yeah, I'm really excited, as I said, as an Albertan. And, as an Albertan, I feel very at home in British Columbia up until about Abbotsford. Halfway through Abbotsford, I'm like, what planet am I on all of a sudden? Like, I could slide right into Merritt. I would run for mayor of Merritt. I love that town. It's very, very Albertan. It feels like Cochrane, actually. And so I often sympathize with my friends in British Columbia because what they experience is much what Alberta experiences in Confederation, where it's like you are a severely normal person being governed by madmen in a far-flung place. That's how we feel about Ottawa, and I think that's how the people of the interior of British Columbia often feel about Vancouver and Victoria.
Well, it's funny, Abbotsford's a little different. It used to be more conservative. In fact, they used to call it the Bible Belt, but as cost of living has increased so much, you see areas like Abbotsford as well as Chilliwack. You see people who have sold their Vancouver homes and made their way to a slightly more affordable life out that way. So it has changed the voter base in those areas as well. And cost of living is one of the main concerns in this election. across the board. I think I'll talk just a little bit about what the parties have been putting forth in
Sure.
that area, because everybody's concerned about that. Actually, Canada, or across Canada, BC is the worst when it comes to how much it costs to buy a home or rent a home. So one of the things that is of major concern is that the young adults are actually saying they have to leave BC in total. You can't even go to Chilliwack anymore. So you have the Rustad rebate, they're calling, where the Conservative Party of BC's plans for that is to go ahead and offer some very significant tax breaks. Tax breaks, it's going to be phased out until 2029, but by next year, they say that if they form government, they would be giving $1,500 per month off in housing cost expenses. So that would be the tax break there. And then it would go all the way up to $3,000. So that could total of $36,000 dollars a year in tax breaks. So that would be significant. So there's the Rustad rebate. His announcement was kiboshed, though, with the smear campaign about him being an alleged anti-vaxxer. We'll talk about that a little bit further. In contrast, you have the BC NDP. They're saying they're going to take a little bit more approach on addressing the situation we have with things like empty houses and things like that. Like there's some areas in suburbs away from Vancouver where you can't rent, and you have foreign owners, usually from China, that have bought up a lot of houses and things like that. And he says he's going to be giving a break to buying mortgages, buying a home with mortgages. So he's going to do some discounts there and sort of release the penalties people get if they move in a condo and then, they have too many kids and then they have to buy another. So he's going to make it easier in those ways there too. So that's one of the big issues. Sheila, what do you think is another big issue for BC?
I think the NDP are going to have a real tough time running from their own policies and their own history. Mm-hmm. For example, they are huge proponents of the carbon tax. The carbon tax is largely one of the reasons. There are many reasons, including out of control government spending, that is driving cost of living and inflation. And they have been supporters of the carbon tax. They have been Justin Trudeau's best friend in imposing the carbon tax on our fellow Canadians. And they're going to have a real tough time now backtracking away from that. The carbon tax is one of the reasons that young people are flocking in droves to the Conservative Party. I saw some data last week, I think it was Angus Reid polling, that showed that Leger, thank you, that showed that the youngest amongst us, voters 18 to 25, they are more conservative than anybody else. They are the ones most committed to voting for conservative parties. Like 50% of young people are saying, I'm voting conservative, and the progressives get the rest of them. And the carbon tax is largely to blame for that. I think the NDP are going to have also a hard time running from their own drug policy. The reason that's top of mind from me right now is I just got off health committee hearings, House of Commons health committee hearings from this morning, but I was in committees all day, so I didn't get a chance to get back to it, where a family who has lost a 13-year-old daughter, Brianna McDonald, was testifying before the health committee about how Justin Trudeau's failed drug policies and the drug policies of the BC NDP killed their daughter. Not just the catch and release policies of Justin Trudeau's so-called justice system. The only time I guess you get held in jail is if you honk your horn a little too loud in the nation's capital. But they were pleading for mental health help from Fraser Health. Their daughter had been hospitalized for an opioid overdose 1 month prior, 4 weeks before she was found dead in a drug camp. Homeless camp, drug camp is what they really are, of an overdose. And when they were fighting to get her treatment, Fraser Health and the other health authorities involved said, well, here's your naloxone kit, and here's your drug paraphernalia, your safe supply paraphernalia. That's the best that we can do. And that has been drug policy under the NDP and under Justin Trudeau, and they cannot run from the social decay and destruction that has caused. And you only need to look at Alberta to see how doing it different saves lives.
You know, I actually spoke to Brianna McDonald's stepfather, and you're right. It's just such a heartbreaking story, and it's not the only story like it. There they are on the screen there. So absolutely, I have a young person in my family. It's the same thing. Even if you do have to go to the hospital for some reason, they want to push you out right away. So that's actually one of the things you're correct in saying, the carbon tax, as well as, of course, the so-called Safer Supply NDP program that's been rolled out and only correlated with higher overdoses. That's one of the things. But we're already seeing some flip-flopping with Premier Eby on that. It's almost like he's trying to become conservative out of panic, perhaps, on how well the Conservative parties are doing in those areas. So the Conservative Party has said they are going to go ahead and put an end to decriminalization and the safer supply initiatives that have been in place. Mr. Rustad says that it is not safe whatsoever. And of course, they were saying we're going to help with involuntary care. I believe the Conservatives call it involuntary compassionate care. So that if anybody is if anybody's a risk to themselves or others, guess what? You're going to get care. And also, especially if you're a minor, that wouldn't have happened for Brianna McDonald. And even if you're not a minor, same thing. They're going to be opening some facilities and putting those around. He made the announcement of it. But Premier David Eby is actually pissing off some of his own supporters by saying he's going to do involuntary care. And I think Brianna's death had a lot to do with that. The publicity around that, it didn't look very good. So at least it's not in vain. And the other thing he's flip-flopping on is the carbon tax. In case anybody's watching and doesn't know, we have our own carbon tax here that we're obligated to match the federal government, but we also don't have limits on how high we could go with that tax. And I think we were the first to put a tax in. And I've said it before, but when federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said, hey, premiers, join me in trying to fight the Trudeau carbon tax hike, Eby mocked him. He laughed at him and said, you know what? I don't live in the Poilievre baloney factory. You know, I live in the real world, and we really need this carbon tax. So for him to be flip-flopping, the Conservatives call him a flip-flopping liar now. But those are some of the ways that I would say they are panic promises, where he's saying, oh, shoot, this is looking really bad. And people have had enough with in these homeless camps or drug dens, whatever you want to call them, being everywhere. I recently just covered how in a suburb called Coquitlam, it's about 45 minutes away from Vancouver, they have a homeless camp. I've driven through there many times. I've never, ever seen that in so many years growing up here. So it's coming everywhere. And I think we have a little clip, if we have time for it, just playing a little bit of it. It's Rustad's plan to say, I'm getting rid of tent cities altogether. Do we have that clip? If not, we can keep yabbing because there we go.
Yeah.
When we look at these situations, the tent cities that we've seen crop up, often we are seeing crime, not just within tent cities, but beyond, within the neighborhood, within the area. Drugs are commonplace throughout this. And occasionally we also have situations of violence. And in my opinion, this is the part of the problem. This is what needs to change. This is what needs to come to an end in British Columbia. And so part of this is we need to make sure we've got a clear path towards addressing this and cleaning up our streets. As the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we also recognize that it's not just about people who are homeless or people who are addicted or people with mental health. There's a combination of things that are happening. We need to do what we can for each of those groups. It's not a one-size-fits-all in order to being able to solve these things. But we're committed to bringing an end to having tent cities in this province. It is not the way that I think anybody would like to see their loved ones or people be able to live. It's certainly not what we want to see happening within communities because of the issues and things that can come up and happen as part of this. And so that also means, though, as part of that, we need to make sure that we have options. Where we have people with addictions, we need to make sure that we provide the opportunity for people to get clean through detox, and then have the opportunity for supportive housing that is drug-free. And that's a key, in my opinion, is these these facilities that we build need to be drug-free and zero tolerance for drugs.
I want to comment on that drug-free. I've done lots of volunteering at shelters and things, and then it became in BC more common to have this safe drug use in the shelters or around the shelters. And I mean, that is so harmful, especially for people who are waiting for recovery, because there is a wait list. So if you need help and you're down and out and you have to go to a shelter, but you're like, I'm done, I've hit my rock bottom, I want to go to treatment, you have to wait. You're staying at a shelter where people are using. So I love that he says drug-free. He also said it's time to clean up the streets, which reminds me of what took place here yesterday. How shocking. So many of you, of course, know that yesterday was October 7th, the 1-year anniversary since the Hamas terror attack on Israel, a massacre that played out on innocent people. And across the country, including in Vancouver, we had both things like vigils where the Jewish community is mourning. We've had 8 Canadians die, for example, and of course they have loved ones back home. But we also saw anti-Israel demonstrations roll out across the country. And we saw some horrific things happening. I was actually at a synagogue. The report will be coming out soon, a Vancouver synagogue covering, the people's plight. And not too far at the Vancouver Art Gallery, let's take a look at some of what was happening, and then we'll talk about the leaders' response to it in BC.
Israel, burn, burn! Israel, burn, burn! Palestinians will return! Land back, land back! Land back, land back! Land back, land back! Land back, land back! Land back! Israel, burn, burn! Palestinians will return! Israel is a terrorist state!
They burnt the flag to the crisp. Can you also just show, it's really quick, can you show what they were chanting on the steps? I think I shared that a little lower down. I mean, they were all chanting this, and then we'll talk about what we just saw.
Yeah. And
I think
Rustad's reaction.
And Rustad's reaction, and NDP's lack thereof.
Exactly.
EB's lack thereof. Well, if we don't have that, they were chanting, "We are Hezbollah, we are Hamas," burning the Canadian flag on October 7th. I mean, this is some sick, evil, twisted stuff. And I would call that an anti-Israel and anti-Canadian demonstration. You saw the backlash when somebody dare put a Canadian flag on Terry Fox during the trucker convoy.
Sure.
We have people who are most likely not even citizens burning our flag, saying that they are Hamas and Hezbollah. And
those are outlawed terrorist organizations, by the way. They're on the terror list. That's like saying, I am ISIS, I am Al Qaeda. That's exactly a post 9/11, by the way, because the terror attacks were akin to Israel's 9/11. In fact, actually worse when you scale up by population. So the NDP, not much was said about this. However, John Rustad had lots to say.
Yep.
We are the Black Panthers. We are the Double
Here's the
Tigers.
chant.
We are Alan Sarr. We are the Zapatistas. We are the SLN. And yes, we are Hezbollah and we are Hamas.
And they cheer.
That is so sick. And like I said, the vigil is happening just down the street. Now, I looked at David Eby's Twitter and his Facebook. I saw nothing about this. John Rustad has been busy. I should backtrack, because before this happened, John Rustad already put a statement out saying that he would go hard on any foreigners who are applauding terrorist attacks. So he actually said that, I don't know if it was the day of October 7th or October 6th. And then look what happens to show how important it is. So this is his response to seeing what you guys just saw. We don't have it. Scroll up.
it's Livy's just going to need a quick second. So while she's doing that, I'll read our first rant that came in. It's from Miss Stacy Lynn. She said the National Post reported January 10th, 2024. Yes, this is true. BC NDP to give safer supply, as if there's such a thing as a safe version of an opioid poison. Fentanyl to minors, and parents won't have a say. No minimum age listed, protocols provided, giving youth taxpayer-funded recreational use of poisons. Why don't you just have safe supply of drinkable bleach while you're at it?
We've gone, it's not funny. I don't know why I'm laughing. It's either I laugh or I cry, and we're on a live stream, so I don't
Because it's so absurd. You can't even believe that it's real, that the government is giving your kid fentanyl, like your 13-year-old fentanyl. And here's her crack pipe. Here's her crack pipe. And you're like, no, she needs mental health. Here's the crack pipe. That's the best we can do.
Well,
tampons in the men's room and crack pipes.
Yeah, and first they called it a safe supply, and then it was safer supply. And they continue saying that after they know that it's been being diverted to the kids are just meeting them on the corner and buying these things from them, and they don't care.
Also, I heard testimony at committee that your safe supply, and we know this to be true, your safe supply is turning up and killing Albertans. So, it's like a ripple in a pond. You just dump the safe supply in there and it just ripples out and kills people all along the way, even in jurisdictions who choose another path. We have John Rustad's clip here. Olivia, do we have it now? On the terrorists. David Eby, silent. John Rustad, choosing something completely different.
Hi, John Rustad here. I'm out in front of the art gallery where last night a mob came and burnt a Canadian flag, threatened Canadians, threatened the United States, threatened Jewish people. I find this sort of violence completely unacceptable. This sort of hate should have no place in British Columbia. And we've had a premier who is silent on this. He refuses to crack down on this in British Columbia. This is unacceptable to us. A Conservative government will make sure we crack down on this type of hate. There is no place for that in British Columbia.
Right. Absolutely. I stress the anti-Canadian thing because that's what that is. And let's not forget that the radical left is all over that movement. And what do they say about the average Canadians? They call them colonizers and occupiers. Very similar language. So I think we're going to move on. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And sorry. Yes. And further to this, John Rustad calls on the federal government to designate Samadoun, I think I'm saying that right, as a terrorist organization. John Rustad, leader of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, is calling on the federal government to immediately designate Samadoun as a terrorist organization, seize all their assets. Just pretend they're prickly truckers, seize their assets and investigate their funding sources. This call comes in response to recent demonstrations where members of the organization and their supporters chanted, "We are Hamas, we are Hezbollah," while burning Canadian flags and calling for death to Canada, death to the United States, and death to Israel. This is not just hate speech. This is incitement to violence and terrorism, Rustad said. It is unacceptable that these individuals are allowed to spread such venom and hatred in our community, glorifying terror groups and calling for the destruction of nations, including our own. Yeah, I mean, if Samadoun, if I'm saying that right, although I don't care if I say it right. I don't care if I'm offending them. But if they are saying, we are Hezbollah, we are Hamas, okay, great. You're an outlawed terrorist organization too.
Not only that, they admit that they are celebrating October 7th because Charlotte Cates, I believe is her name, is one of their primary organizers, who there's a video circulating of her saying, they say we're celebrating October 7th. Well, we are celebrating it. And then there's all this clapping. I mean, this is scary stuff as soon as it turns on everybody else. So there's that saying, first the Jews, then the Christians, then you. So I think we have a Rumble ad to read, and then we're going to get into some of our special guests today. So,
I'll get the Rumble ad if you want, and then I think we have time to talk about just one more issue of note. Of note for me as an Albertan, but me as a firearms owner. And the reason I point this out is because John Rustad is driving the NDP mental because of his support of firearms rights. And I think it flows directly from the strong stance of my premier, emboldening the other premiers to do the same. So first of all, Plunder World, stop playing games. Plunder World trading cards are the blunt force collectible in the culture war. Each card details the people, It's a collection of the greatest trading cards ever made. Collect 279 cards detailing history and wake up peers with Plunder World. Get people interested in reading instead of scrolling. There are limited quantities of Series 1 at plunderworld.com. These will not last. I'm very interested. Each box holds 36 foil packs. Each card has 7 packs. All cards are randomly inserted. There are 7 ultra rare cards. Order now and get free shipping within the United States. Plunder World is a new twist on trading cards that dares to change collecting forever. Just like this stream you are watching, please support independent media like Plunder World. Continued support will ensure more series to follow. So that's plunderworld.com. That sounds interesting. Just briefly, I want to touch on before I get kicked off so you can bring in your guests. John Rustad is making the NDP absolutely lose their marbles because he has said that he will not direct scarce BC policing resources, which I think is the right move here. We just heard about all the problems BC is having with opioids, crime in the big cities, homelessness, just the social decay. And so he said, no, I don't think we're going to direct our policing resources to deal with law-abiding firearms owners who haven't done anything wrong. And it makes sense because firearms owners in the interior are not the ones shooting up the big city. It's not us, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the gangbangers didn't go to the same RPAL course that I did. And so the NDP this is how the NDP worded it. Can you just stop scrolling so fast because I can't find it on my screen? Can you bring it back up, please? And I'm going to put on my granny glasses and try to read. So, Rustad confirmed today for the 4th time that he would direct police not to enforce recent gun laws such as Bill C-21. And I'm like, stop, I already like him, which restricts semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15, 3D printed ghost guns, and freezes handgun sales. Yes, but C-21 also outlaws such things as a very cool, however, very tiny 410 bird gun and the Mini 14 ranch rifle, which farmers use for hunting pests and predatory animals like coyotes. I probably wouldn't even use it to take down a deer. They're also concerned with several models of shotguns. And the NDP word it as though like it's just going to be mayhem in the streets.
Right.
Let us remember that these guns were so dangerous in the hands of law-abiding people like me that we've had them in our hands for 4.5 years. They haven't taken a single one from us. Well, thank God. Pray for government ineptitude right now. But they haven't taken a single gun from us because we're not the problem. Crime has not gone up while I get to keep certain firearms that the federal government has said are just too dangerous for me to own.
Yeah, no, they're twisting it all. They make it sound as though he's not going to go hard on gang violence, which is obviously where the problem with the guns is. When right from the beginning, even before it was election time, the Conservative Party was always talking about how they need to be harder on crime, and they're even calling for things like bail reform. They're calling for more stricter sentences for different types of offenses. So this is not the party that is going to be ignoring the actual threat to citizens, which isn't people like Sheila or your hunters or your practice shooters or what have you. I don't know. Every time the left goes at it just makes me want to learn how to shoot guns. That's all it does.
You know what? And that's the thing. Take a lefty to the gun range, firearms owners out there. It'll convert them real fast. They'll be like, this is so cool. And they'll realize how safe we really are and how much training we have. We're not the guys walking around with a 9mm in our waistband, shooting people up at stop signs. That's not who we are. We have to call and ask some nerd in an office for permission before we can take our restricted firearm to the range, which is the only place that we're allowed to use it. And it just shows how the NDP really don't want to even be the government for all of British Columbia. They only want to be the government for Victoria and for Vancouver, because this doesn't even take into account the lifestyle of the people outside of Victoria and Nanaimo on Vancouver Island, who are very firearms friendly, and literally the entire province outside of the Lower Mainland. It's a very firearms friendly, outdoorsy friendly culture there. But the NDP don't need those people to win. They only need their urbanites in Vancouver.
Couldn't agree more. All right. So I think, look at that. We're like so on top of things right now. It's 6 o'clock, which is exactly when we said we would bring
You know what?
on
David Menzies is the reason I go overtime on these streams. 100%.
But everybody loves David Menzies. So I think we are
do.
going to temporarily say goodbye to our dear Sheila Gunn Reid, but she certainly will be back. And we're going to bring on a very interesting guest. I think we'll do an ad first, a little ad break, and then we'll bring on the guest. And this is, among other things, I'll give you the full introduction when he's there, but a Marxist who plans to be voting for the Conservative Party of BC. Isn't that interesting? Let's go to a break and then stay tuned.
That's a coalition.
I'm in Brazil, so I'm using a VPN to get on the internet. What's a VPN? It stands for a virtual private network, and you get around these government firewalls. Suddenly, the president of Brazil banned his whole country from going on Twitter. It was a political censorship news. I've downloaded the VPN from a company called PIA VPN. We've teamed up with them at Rebel, and it's a great deal. I got on the internet really quickly, safely, and even I'm a bit of a technophobe. I managed to figure it out with 2 clicks. And here's the great news. If you go to piavpn.com/Rebel News, not only do you get a big discount, but they pay us a bit of a commission too. Everyone's a winner. Your freedom, your VPN, and a little bit of cash coming to support Rebel News. I'm using it myself to get around the censors in Brazil. You can use it too. That's piavpn.com/Rebel News.
Together we rise, unleash the power. Unleash the power. Unleash the power. Unleash the power. Together we rise.
What if governments are trying to reinvent the wheel when the greatest teacher of all times has already laid out the perfect blueprint for a constitution for a kingdom of love, faith, and freedom? Introducing the Kingdom of Heaven Freedom Passport. This special edition Freedom Passport captures the foundational truths of love, ethics, and freedom for all. It's a powerful reminder of Jesus's call to love one another and to be part of something bigger that you can carry with you every day. Join the movement, share the truth, and spread the love with your family and friends. Get your Kingdom of Heaven Freedom Passport at freedompassport.ca. And right now, all orders in North America come with free shipping and a free downloadable song with every purchase. What if
Ladies and gentlemen, Leapin' Lincoln J here with none other than the Menzoid. Say, Menzoid, we're enjoying a marvelous summer so far, but a lot of Rebel News viewers are asking, what sort of fashion tips do you have for them in the weeks ahead?
Well, let me tell you something, Leapin' Lincoln. There are all kinds of fashion trends out there for the summer of 2024. There are animal prints ranging from cheetah to zebra. There are those awesome straw hats. And of course, there's that classic teeny-weeny polka dot bikini. But if you don't have one particular item in your summertime ensemble, I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again. Rebel News now has the hottest fashion accessories of the summer. I'm talking Trumpomania t-shirts for $39. I'm talking Trumpomania tank tops for only $35. And when summer's over, folks, no problem. We have Trumpomania sweatshirts and hoodies starting at $55. And brother, when you want to be styling and profiling as you drink your Morning Joe, we even have Trumpomania coffee mugs for just $29. It's all available at the rebelnewsstore.com. Hey, Leapin' Lincoln, try these verses on for size. Roses are red, violets are blue, Hey, Kamala, when Trumpomania hits the campaign trail, what you gonna do?
Why should you join Canada's National Firearms Association? We currently have one of the most aggressively anti-firearm governments in our nation's history, promoting fear and placing blame like never before. Our rights, freedoms, culture, and heritage, it's all on the line. But we are fighting back, and there is strength in numbers. We work within the law to change the law, to defend competitors, hunters, collectors, and other law-abiding firearms owners. We can get through this. We've done it before, and we'll do it again, if you are with us. Canada's National Firearms Association. Freedom, safety, responsibility.
All right, here we have Stuart Parker. Thanks for being on Rebel News. I just saw a lot of my colleague David Menzies' hairy chest, so it's good to have you. I'm going to do an introduction for those who don't know, and I'm going to look down because there's a lot to it. Stuart Parker is the former leader of the BC Greens before. He's a political strategist, so it's going to be fun to have him on here, a historian, and he serves as the president of Los Altos Institute, which is a multi-partisan and anti-authoritarian socialist think tank. And get this, he says he's a Marxist. That's what he would call himself. And he is actually working with the Conservative Party of BC with something to do with their in-house polling firm. So again, thanks for being on Rebel News before the debate.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I'm here as a supporter of the party. I do not work for the BC Conservative Party, but I'm very enthusiastic about what they're up to.
Oh, okay. I thought that's, what did that mean when you said by the in-house polling firm?
Things change rapidly in campaigns. Let's just leave it at that, and we'll get on to talking about the campaign because I'm not interesting. The campaign is interesting.
Okay, sounds good. Maybe just tilt your phone down just a little bit so we can see you a little bit. There we go. So now I do want to talk a little bit. When it comes to left or right, you're definitely what most would think is on the left, but you just said so yourself. You're here to support the Conservative Party of BC. So tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I think it's very basic. If you're actually a socialist, if you're actually a Marxist, you side with the working class. And fundamentally, the NDP hates working class people. They hate working class culture, and they have turned against the class that built the party. And in my view, the most important imperative you have as a socialist is to follow the working class where they've gone and join the projects they're involved in. And especially after living in northern BC, ordinary decent folks, ordinary working people have been completely abandoned, not just abandoned, but fundamentally betrayed by the New Democratic Party and by the Green Party. In a difficult moment like this, in a major political realignment, it is always interesting and surprising who rises to the occasion. But right now, the people who are rising to the occasion on behalf of working people in British Columbia are the Conservatives.
Well, it would seem that way. I had somebody else who's a political strategist on there and said that, parties don't always win elections. It's parties who lose it. So the argument is that the BC NDP is losing it after 7 years and everything going up. Like you said, I asked a question on X the other day, and it was to ask people like yourself, if you were voting a different way this time in this election, why? And surprisingly, quite a few, perhaps it's because of who follows me on X, a lot of them said, because the NDP does not know what a woman is. And they simply, of course, these were women, they said, I simply can't vote for a party who doesn't recognize me and who I am. And I know that part of your journey to where you are now includes knowing what a woman is too. So you can probably relate to that. let's talk about the polls. So we've seen, now we know BC United has, of course, quit the race. And since then, it's been absolutely neck and neck. There was a statistical tie for a bit. And now we're seeing the Conservative Party surpass in the pre-election polls. What can you tell us about the latest?
Well, what's most interesting is for a couple of years now, most anti-establishment voters have been aligning with conservative parties. And by that, I mean 18 to 29-year-old males. So for quite a while, we've seen in both federal voting intentions and provincial voting intentions that that's the group. The most anti-establishment group in society is the group that has moved most rapidly towards parties calling themselves. What we're seeing now, which is very exciting, is that young women have caught up with those young men. That young people generally have caught up with those men. I think you're right about where some of that is coming from. This government is fundamentally misogynistic. It makes women unsafe. And I'm not just talking about gender weighing. I'm not just talking about its aggressive promotion of sterilization, amputation, mutilation, and chemical lobotomies for young girls through the SOGI program. I'm also talking about the fact that women are not safe in our streets. They're not safe in our public transit. They're not safe in women's shelters because we let men in. We're not safe in women's prisons because we put male serial rapists and serial pederasts in them. And so I think even though many young women's values are not fully aligned with those of the Conservative Party, they have been pushed into the terrible position of having to actually cast a vote for their physical safety.
Well, Stuart just mentioned the acronym SOGI. For those who are watching and maybe don't know what that is British Columbia's sexual orientation gender identity program that is rolled out across the province. And it does things like really teach sex activism, push gender confusion on kids. And one of the biggest complaints from parents, and we've covered it many times, is has sexually explicit materials, things like books in libraries that have been approved as inclusive resources. And boy, could the parties not differ anymore when it comes to their stance on that. You have Premier David Eby basically suggesting that any parent that speaks out against stuff like that is a bigot and hates against trans kids, that maybe wants them to be unalived. And you have the Conservative Party of BC promising on their website in a statement to remove SOGI from the schools BC-wide and replacing that with a zero tolerance anti-bullying policy. Well, last word, Stuart, before we bring on our next guest. What do you think is going to happen? What do you think we're going to see October 19th?
It's going to be an absolute nail biter. The reality is the Conservative Party of BC is very young. It has not built the infrastructure to turn its vote out. And so we're going to be relying on enthusiasm at the end of the day. Ultimately, Conservative voters are more enthusiastic voters, but because it's opposite day every day now, Conservative voters are less wealthy and younger than NDP voters. And we have to make sure that young people, less wealthy people, are enthusiastic about
Well, I think we lost him on a cliffhanger there, but there you have it. Political strategist having some technical difficulties, Stuart Parker, but I hope you enjoyed that. I think we're just going to have a quick ad break. There was some technical difficulty, so the last one was a little bit longer than expected, but we'll have a quicker one. I hope, I promise. And then we'll be back with our next guest, who you won't want to miss either.
Right now, I'm standing in front of a massive 47-foot long billboard alongside of Alberta's busiest highway, Highway 2. This thing gets 1.3 million monthly impressions every single month, and it's spreading the word far and wide about the new Rebel News cruise. So if you're thinking about joining us in June 2025 to Alaska, act now because it's going to fill up fast. We're sailing on the Holland America cruise line, which means you can expect top-notch service and luxury while you're on board. But the real excitement, the special Rebel News only events. So what are you waiting for? Head over to rebelnewscruise.com, check out the cabins, see the details, and grab your spot before they're gone. I can't wait to see you there so that we can spend an unforgettable week with some of the best people on the planet, Rebel News supporters. Let's make 2025 the year we come together, have an amazing time, and keep fighting for truth and for freedom. See you on the Rebel News Cruise. Go to rebelnewscruise.com today for cabins and details. For Rebel News, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid.
All right. Hello. There we have my beautiful good friend, Odessa Orlitz. She is the host of Liberty Talk Canada, mother of two in Vancouver, and she calls herself a recovering liberal. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thanks for having me, Drea.
Yeah, so I wanted to bring you on to really, we'll start with giving a voice to sort of the freedom community, because I think that they have been partly some of the reason, a good chunk of the reason for the success of the Conservative Party, because I think this is a grassroots movement and they really appeal to them. But I know you're really in touch with your show, with what's going on with the freedom community, and you even have a sort of a social media setup that you talk with them and stuff. So tell us, what is that community thinking when it comes to this election, this October 19th election?
A lot of talk, a lot of comments. The good news is I'm guesstimating about 85 to 90% of the freedom community knows the importance to get out and vote October 19th, will get it out and vote to get rid of David Eby and the NDP. There's probably about 10%, maybe 15% that I think just are completely wrong and say, what's the point? It's all corrupt. We're not going to go vote. But luckily, that's such a small voice. And the problem with them saying that is they have no solution. It's just don't vote. Well, I mean, John is the best chance they have, and some independents that are the freedom-oriented independents, is the best chance to get rid of Bill 36, get rid of mandates, start investigating corruption, get women's spaces back so that we're safe. And so anyone that thinks that they shouldn't vote just to sort of make a statement, no one's going to notice. And by not voting, you're voting for David Eby.
You make some good points about who's the best bet for things like mandates. For anybody who might not know, BC was the last jurisdiction in North America to let go of the mandate that was preventing healthcare workers from saving lives, despite ERs closing all across the province, especially in rural areas, and shortage of paramedics, all of these things. They let it go, and it was totally because of the election, in my opinion. But that reminds me, and another reason why I say the freedom movement was involved in part of the Conservative Party's success, is that when the contenders, the official opposition party, which was BC United, was still, up and trying to fight the fight, the NDP last year brought forth this silly motion where they wanted everybody in the legislature to vote a year after the convoy had been stomped out by the Trudeau government. They wanted the MLAs to vote to either support or condemn the Freedom Convoy from a year ago, and to applaud vaccine mandates. And this was one of the fatal areas, I think, was BC United took the stance, and I interviewed some of their MLAs at the time who said, basically they were told, if you disagree with the mandate and agree with the convoy, don't show up. So it was all yays for them for that dumb NDP motion. And then when it came to who was the only MLA to say nay, it was John Rustad. So that is one example of who do you have better. Also, the Conservative Party is saying they will fire Dr. Bonnie Henry. That's the one who was enforcing the mandate. So you're right. What better odds do you have to be free than to have the Conservative Party win? And not only that, to hold them accountable to their many provinces if they do form government. Now, the other reason I wanted to talk to you is this horrific smear campaign we're seeing. And it's normal to have some smearing going back and forth. But I personally would call it lying. If anybody actually compares one thing that's said by David Eby to what's actually happening, I think it's a lie. What's your thoughts on what's sticking out to you most about the smear campaign?
Well, even Global News, who, serves David Eby his propaganda on a plate, even their tickers are being more honest than David Eby is. It's actually quite disgusting what David Eby did. It was a full-on lie. And I think John Rustad should call out David Eby tonight during the debate for the gross lie that he told while standing in a classroom. What David Eby did was, for the people that are just watching Global News and they don't actually look at Twitter, they don't know the truth, he insinuated that, well, basically what he said was, how dare, and I'm paraphrasing, but how dare and how disgusting that John Rustad on October 7th, which we all know what happened last year on October 7th, how dare he make a comment about Nuremberg and the Holocaust? It's quite disgusting. And he talked about conspiracy theorists, but that is not what happened. And in fact, John didn't make a post on October 7th about what David's talking about. And in fact, John made a post on Twitter because he was forced to on October 6th in a response to a false allegation because of the way that the mainstream news had spun it, that somehow John Rustad was talking about and using the term Nuremberg 2.0. Now, we've heard that term for the last 4 years because there are people that have, I know you're on YouTube, but that have been harmed by either you know what. So other people use that term, and all John did, because I watched the video where John had an interview, and the person interviewing him, without John knowing or expecting it, said, I heard you're going to do like a Nuremberg 2.0 investigation if you get in to what happened during COVID. John diffused it. He wouldn't use that term. He said something like, that's out of my scope. I don't really know what you're talking about. He said it twice.
Yeah,
and
he deflected it twice. And
he diffused it, but then also confirmed that he would like to do an investigation along with other entities or provinces. He would like that. He never used that word. And in fact, it was such a nothing burger. It just goes to show how disgusting and desperate David Eby is, because he took it so far with what he said on the news, and he's just a liar.
You're right. I tried to find the video of it, but there is the video available and you can see exactly what Odessa said. Rustad was being interviewed by a group that is pro-freedom, and he was asked, and like he said it was out of the scope, but they've totally twisted it and timed it for October 7th. At the beginning of this, we explained how when it comes to that situation, Rustad is actually taking a hard stance against anti-Semitism, where we're not hearing anything from Eby about anti-Israel, and I would say anti-Canadian protesters burning the Canadian flag during a pro-Palestinian demonstration yesterday. So the other thing that I want to say, I think we have the video of this, and I think we don't have enough time to play it. But the other thing in the smear campaign was, of course, the anti-vaxxer. I think it was maybe in the same sort of interview, they're sort of rolling out sections of this, and they roll out John Rustad saying that he had 3 vaccines, and he says he regrets it. And after he spoke with Dr. Bonnie Henry, he believes that the whole vaccine mandate was more about control. That's him there. Do we have time to play it? It's short. Let's play it.
I had a conversation with Dr. Bonnie Henry, and then realized that, wait a second, something doesn't seem to be quite right with this, especially when we got into the mandates on vaccines. Now, I've had 3 shots of the vaccine. I wish I hadn't. Quite frankly, that's one of the things that's changed in my thinking. The so-called vaccine, the COVID mRNA shots. When I talked to Bonnie Henry about it, I started to realize that it wasn't so much about trying to get herd immunity or trying to stop the spread, but it was more around shaping opinion and control on the population. I had a conversation.
So that
Mhm.
is the clip that's been being used against him in this smear campaign. And David Eby does this thing. I reported on this because he's done this before with Pierre Poilievre. He twists anybody who says anything about vaccine mandates, and he starts talking about measles, and he tries to scare parents. And so he says, "Oh, he's an anti-vaxxer. Well, measles is killing kids. What's he going to do about the measles shot?" What was your thought when you saw how much the news actually made headlines with that, which was a deflection from Rusted's pretty compelling policy for cheaper housing, a big tax break for renters and homeowners? What was your thought?
I just see how desperate NDP government's getting, David Eby's getting, and our news is getting, because they have no leg to stand on with anything they've done. Our towns and cities are a mess. Everything's a mess. And so I think they know that they have to actually start lying and stretching the truth and being deceptive to the people that don't watch anything but mainstream news in hopes it gains them a couple of more votes. I can see Eby's getting nervous and he's just starting to lie.
Yes, I agree. Desperate times call for desperate measures. Well, thank you, Odessa Orlitz. You can find her show probably on X is the easiest way to look her up. And I'm excited for the debate. I asked Stuart Parker before he left for last words. I'll ask you the same question. What do you think is going to happen on October 19th?
I don't want to jinx it. All I know, last words, Drea, is no matter what happens, I'm happy to know that at least half of BC won't put up with what they pulled in the last 4 years. Hallelujah.
Amen. Thanks for being on Rebel News.
Thank you. See ya.
All right. I think we're going to be seeing the lovely Sheila Gunn Reid in a moment here. I'm going to have a look here to see if there are any chats or anything. There was some nice love I saw there where people were saying, "Oh, they were so excited to talk to us." I'm so excited to talk to you too. So we'll do a quick ad and then we'll have Sheila come back.
Here is my kind of passport, folks. Look at this beauty. Introducing a new special edition Freedom Passport. What if the greatest teacher of all time framed his message as a constitution for a kingdom of love, faith, and freedom? Inspired by Jesus' teachings in the Sermon on the Mount, this special edition Freedom Passport captures the foundational truths of love and freedom for all. It's a powerful reminder of Jesus' call to love one another that you can carry with you every day. Join the movement, share the truth, and spread the love with your family and friends. Get your Freedom Passport today at freedompassport.ca. That's freedompassport.ca. All orders in North America come with free shipping and a complimentary song with each purchase.
There you are. I'm so happy to have you back.
I don't know. You're having a very great conversation with your two guests. So I'm happy you went a little bit long. I know we've got a message from Rumble. And then I think if we have time real quick, if I can get to the ad read, let's talk about John Rustad expressing vaccine regret. And I think the NDP are attacking him for it, but I think that's where a lot of people who got the vaccine are at. It just normalizes him to a lot of people. So 1775coffee.com. Do you enjoy the free speech that Rumble is protecting and fighting for? Our show on Rumble right now is only possible thanks to our viewers supporting Rumble's platform and by purchasing Rumble's products. Most of you drink coffee every day. Sounds like Dre is drinking some right now. That's why you have to try Rumble's 1775 coffee. It's actually some of the best coffee, and it's the same price as the coffee you buy now, but it's way better. Rumble's 1775 coffee is free from chemicals, rich in flavor. This is because their beans are sourced from high-altitude farms in Bolivia, hand-picked, roasted weekly at their facility in Miami, and delivered fresh to your doorstep. As believers in freedom, buying from Rumble helps fight back against woke corporations like Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, of all places. Join the coffee revolution and brew rebellion with Rumble's 1775 coffee. Go to 1775coffee.com. Use the code STUDIO to get a free month's supply of their cognitive boosting supplement, Limitless. When you buy 2 bags of their coffee, you should get that if you watch too much House of Commons and then the Liberals just suck your brain right out your ear. Think about that. It's a crazy deal, and the supplement is worth more than 2 bags of coffee for free. Go to 1775coffee.com and try their amazing coffee. Again, the code is STUDIO. Drea, let us talk about, I'm frozen, John Rustad's his vaccine regret video. I think the NDP actually released it thinking it would make him look bad, and I was like, stop again. I already like him.
They got that from BC United somehow. We're unclear on how they got it, but it was basically, I mean, I would theorize that it's a disgruntled MLA perhaps that didn't make the cut for the Conservative Party but I don't know. But they got this whole lot and they seem to be rolling out. We actually just played a clip when Odessa was on, so we know exactly what you're talking about. But one thing I will add to that is what the news didn't cover, I think I only saw it in one article, and of course we covered it, is that Rustad further explained that he himself says that he had heart issues after taking the 3 you-know-whats. I can't keep up with the YouTube rules. So a lot of people can relate with that. A lot of people know people who are hesitant. The uptake of the 600th jab you're supposed to be on to be updated, that's not happening. So I think people are just tired. It's like, really, with everything happening with crack pipes and vending machines, you're going to be talking about him being hesitant about taking the COVID jab? I don't think anybody was really buying it, except for people who are going to vote for NDP no matter what.
Right. People talking about how many times they've been boosted and jabbed is like how I know that you're voting for the NDP. It's like an NDP lawn sign for your blood system. I think he's right where a lot of people are. And we know that is true because the vaccine uptake just dropped right off as soon as it was no longer mandatory. As soon as you didn't need to be boosted to travel, go to work, or go to the bar to have a drink, people just stopped taking it. So nobody actually wanted it. They took it as an inoculation against isolation and unemployment. And I think we're ready to go.
Here we go. It's about to begin.
And the rules for this debate. Neither the topics nor the questions have been shared with you or your teams in advance. Tonight, you will be facing individual questions. You'll also have the opportunity to engage with one another during periods of open debate. And just before we begin, a few words from me to you. Please remember your audience this evening. It is the people of British Columbia, many of whom are engaging for the first time tonight by watching and listening to you. Let's give them a vigorous but respectful debate, one that everyone can hear and understand. The questions have been designed to challenge you and bring out the best responses you have. So please answer them. Okay, ready to debate?
Ready.
Okay. So our first topic tonight is leadership, and our first question goes to Mr. Eby. Mr. Eby, when your predecessor, John Horgan, stepped down, he left you with a $6 billion budget surplus. Your premiership has been marked by more spending, yet people are still struggling to see improvements in public safety, housing, and affordability. How much longer do British Columbians have to wait before they start to see things improve under your government?
Thanks for the question, Shachi, and good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'd also like to say a special thank you to the Vancouver Canucks for starting their season tomorrow instead of tonight, so that you could join us for this important discussion about where our province is going and how we can provide support for you and for your families. Families are under a lot of pressure right now. Huge strain from rising interest rates, global inflation driving up the cost of pretty much everything. I mean, the cost of food is the topic in the American presidential debate. And that's having an impact on the provincial budget too. You can see that impact on the ability of government to spend. And so the question that you're going to hear answers to tonight is now the time that people need support more than ever? That's what I think. Or is now the time to cut back, to reduce services? And I believe that people need support now through things like our middle income tax cut, through affordable childcare and car insurance. We started this work, Shachi, as you said, under John Horgan, and we haven't stopped. And we can't stop because people need more support than ever to deal with the challenges they're facing today.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Next question to you, Mr. Rustad.
He
More than
accidentally
half of
said we
British
started
Columbians
this
say
work.
that you are too extreme in your views to be premier. You've expressed discomfort with sex education curriculum. You've said you regret taking the COVID vaccine. You suggested on a podcast that carbon emissions aren't a problem for carbon-based beings. How can you convince everyone in this province that you have the judgment and the temperament to be premier for all British Columbians?
Those are normal
Thank
things.
you very much for the question, and thanks everybody for tuning in as well. I think it's important to think about where we are as a province with what's going on. There are many things that people are concerned about in BC. There's many things that have been said about me as a leader. And I can tell you something, as the Conservative Party of British Columbia, we are laser focused on the people of this province. 1 in 3 people are thinking about leaving this province. 1 in 2 youth can't see a future by staying in British Columbia. This, to me, is what needs to change. As a government, a Conservative Party will make sure that we're laser focused on people, on making sure that we meet their needs. There are many issues that people raise, but I tell you, when I go across this province, whether it's in Vancouver Island, or whether it's the Lower Mainland, or whether it's the North or the Okanagan, it's the same issue. People are struggling to put food on the table. That's why we come forward with cutting the carbon tax. That'll save $1,200 per family in a year. That's why we've put forward the Rustad rebate to reduce the burden of whether you're renting or paying a mortgage, which is $3,000 per year that will be savings. $1,800. That'll be $3,000. Significant amount of money to be able to help people in this province.
Thank
month,
you,
I believe it.
Mr. Rustad. To you now, Ms. Furstenau. The size of your caucus in the legislature is down to just 2, yourself and Adam Olsen, who's chosen not to run again. Your former leader, Andrew Weaver, is endorsing the Conservatives this time.
Oh, I
Why
didn't
would
know
voters
that.
consider the Green Party?
Wow.
Good evening, and I would say that the need to consider voting for the Green Party is that we are getting a lack of leadership from the other 2 leaders. And I just want to talk about the answers they just gave. David Eby says people need help right now, but there are people working for social development, poverty reduction, being paid $40 an hour to deny $40 credits to people who need emergency groceries. When John Rustad says he's laser focused on the people, I wonder which people he's talking about, because it's certainly not people who are struggling. It's certainly not people who can't pay the rent. It's certainly not people who need help when it comes to mental health and healthcare. What these 2 are offering is either more of the same or back to the past with John Rustad, who's been in the legislature since 2005, who is part of the government that cut services, that cut funding to education, that took away the help and supports that people need, so that we find ourselves now 23 years downstream from a BC Liberal government and 7 years downstream from an NDP government that hasn't been willing to do enough to change things. That's why we need Greens in the legislature.
Thank you. And now a question to all of you. Recent polling indicates that none of you have a clear lead in the public's hearts. Over the last week, British Columbians' views of you have worsened more than they've improved over the last few weeks. To the undecided voter, how do each of you differentiate yourselves from one another? Each of you will answer this question, leaders. We're going to start with you, Ms. Furstenau, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby.
The way we differentiate ourselves is that we focus on a future that BC could have. We focus on recognizing what's gotten us here, understanding the complex problems we face, the serious problems we face with affordability, with climate change, with lack of healthcare. And then we propose solutions that are actually going to get us out of these crises. We cannot pretend that climate change isn't real. We cannot pretend that climate change is real and the solution is to build more fossil fuel infrastructure. We have to focus on recognizing that to serve the people of BC, to serve the future of this province, we need politicians who take the role seriously and who move beyond slogans and telling us what we want to hear, and recognize that we need a plan for the future. We are the only party that has a serious platform that is costed and that focuses on getting us to a much better place in this province.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. And when I look at what's going on in British Columbia today, there are people dying on the streets. There are people dying on the streets, whether it's from crime or whether it's drugs. I was on my way over here, and at the corner of Robson and Hornby, there's an individual who died. and there was emergency people rushing. This person died from an overdose. This is the British Columbia that David Eby has created. Tent cities are growing all over the place. We have a crisis in healthcare. We've got a crisis in affordability. We've got a crisis in housing. What we need is a common sense plan that is going to be able to deliver for people in this province. British Columbia has all the potential you could ever want. We have all the resources that we could ever want. We've got a well-trained, well-educated population, but we're hopelessly managed. What's needed in British Columbia is a government that will tackle these issues, that will make sure we get government out of the way, and that we make sure that people can once again be proud to be British Columbia and to be able to build a future here.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby.
Thanks. There are huge challenges in our province, and they're not unique to our province, whether it's the cost of living, challenges around getting the doctors and nurses that we need to ensure our healthcare system delivers care for you and your family when and where you need it. The issue of affordable housing. These are critical challenges, and we can solve these problems. In fact, we're starting to turn the corner on some of them. For example, connected 250,000 people to a family doctor in the last year. We're going to connect another 160,000 in the next 6 months. Well, every British Columbian who wants a family doctor will be able to have one by the end of 2025 at the pace we're going right now. What you hear from John Rustad, conspiracy theories, division, cuts, it's not going to solve the problems that we face. We got to take these problems head on, and we've got to do so much more. And we can solve these problems together.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. So now it's time
What
for
took
you
so long?
leaders to debate. And
Why
here's
now?
how this is supposed to work.
Yeah.
Everyone's microphones will be on. What I would ask is that you allow each other to finish at least a first thought for the first person who starts, because somebody's got to start, and then the rest of you can jump in. So Mr. Rustad, you're going to open this debate section. How do you respond to what you've heard so far from Mr. Eby and Ms. Furstenau?
Well, clearly when I think about British Columbia and I think about the fact that 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia, that to me is a failure of leadership. It's weak leadership in British Columbia. People should be able to hope and build a dream here. Today in British Columbia, there is close to half the people that have passed because of an overdose in Canada, right here in British Columbia. It is failures of government policy. We need to make sure that we can build hope for people. We need to make sure that we can unleash our resources and our economy so that people can build that hope.
It's
and
astonishing.
build that future.
It really is astonishing to hear John Rustad always talk about how many young people want to leave BC, but never talk about investing in young people, never talking about investing in education, never talk
Indoctrinating.
about investing in making sure there's enough psychologists and counselors in our schools, never talk about ensuring that university and post-secondary are affordable for people, and never talk about how we're really going to make sure that housing is affordable in this province, which is to get non-market housing in, to put vacancy control in place, and to stop real estate investment trusts from driving up housing prices and rents in this province. He never talks about solutions. He talks about all the problems, and he consistently focuses on what's negative. I feel like I live in a different place from John Rustad. His vision of BC is one that is dark and gloomy. We need a vision of hope. If we want young people to stay here, we have to give them a reason to stay.
Shachi, we need hope and a plan. And that's what we're delivering for young people. Now, John Rustad's, he talked about his Rustad rebate. I call it the Rustad long wait. You don't actually get to benefit from it fully until 2029. People need support right now. It also excludes young people. If you're working and you're living with parents, if you're in a multi-generational home, you don't benefit at all from this plan. Who benefits the most? If you own a penthouse in downtown Vancouver, you benefit the most from his tax cut. But if you're sharing a home, you don't.
Dave says that.
That doesn't make any sense.
No interest in
Young
actually.
people need support. And, you know, John Rustad's housing plan. The Globe and Mail says it's not going to build a single unit of housing. He himself says it's not the Premier's job to ensure affordable housing. Well, that's exactly what got us into this mess.
But if
we were
were
in government,
interested,
you didn't
if
think
we
it
were
was your job.
concerned about that wealth, we would be taxing that wealth. There's no plan in the NDP platform. There's no Conservative platform so far. But if we were concerned about that enormous accumulation of wealth, if we were concerned about the growing inequality and the growing poverty, we would be looking at ways to actually tax some of that wealth. We have that in our platform. Silence from the NDP.
So look,
silence from the
clear what
Conservatives.
The NDP have just said and what David Eby just said. David Eby actually said the private sector has no place in housing, and that's just wrong.
Did I say that?
Yes, you did, Mr. Eby. The reality as well is this: we are going to cut the carbon tax by getting rid of the carbon taxes in British Columbia. That will save $1,200 for a family today. And yet David Eby, he wants to actually double the carbon tax in his next term. That is what he has said he will do. And so this is the reality we're facing in British Columbia. That is more money just in the carbon tax saving alone than what he is proposing with his taxes. And for him to come out and say that $900 right away for the Rustad rebate in terms of the rent and in terms of mortgages, those are people, hardworking people in British Columbia that will get
by
that benefit right away. And I wish we could bring the whole thing in, except that the fiscal mismanagement and a $14 billion deficit being proposed by David Eby will take away the future of people.
You seem to want to respond.
Well, I don't even know where to start here, Shachi. John Rustad can't get rid of the carbon tax because of the federal backstop. He also is not telling you the full story about his Rustad long wait, that you don't actually see a benefit until at the earliest 2026, and then only if you own your home or if you have high rental costs. If you're living in a rural part of British Columbia and you have low rent, you see the least amount of benefit. And that's why there's a guy with an $80 million house in my constituency.
I knew it, Chip Wilson.
But I'm on your side.
That's why
you and your families at home, to make sure you get access to immediate benefit from the tax cut.
Look, we have
not
the largest
2 years from now, not 5 years from now.
We have the
right
largest, probably most violent hurricane lining up off the coast of Florida, and we have 2 leaders retreating from climate action in this province.
Okay, well, leaders, that brings to a close our first round of open debate, but I think you'll like this. The next theme is housing affordability, so you get to talk a little bit more about it. Housing in BC is the most expensive in North America. It's an issue that links the economy and quality of life. It links the economy to quality of life. Each of you have called it a crisis. Mr. Rustad, the first question comes to you. You say you will undo NDP policies, including rent caps, restrictions on short-term rentals, and allowing more density on single-family lots. How would removing these measures help with affordability? What is your plan for housing?
So Sachi, thank you very much for the question. To start with, we did not say we'll remove rent caps, and we're not going to remove rent caps. That's something that's very clear to be done, that needs to be done in British Columbia. When we look at housing in this province, we have a government, David Eby, that is saying it was, first of all, it was foreigners, and then it was speculators, and then it was vacant properties, and then it was Airbnbs. Instead of pointing at the real problem, which is government, and government is getting in the way. It takes far too long to get permits in this province. It takes far too long to get housing built in this province. We're going to come to communities with $1 billion a year to be able to invest in things like water and sewer upgrades so that we can clean up the backlog that's needed, so that the investment can be there for densification. We're going to work with communities on zoning so that we can zone for densification, as opposed to David Eby's approach of just overriding local governments. Working with local governments is critical because we also need to make sure local governments can get the permitting process done much faster. It's also why we're looking at using the old MERB program, the multi-unit residential buildings. This is a program that was very successful building rental units across this country. It's critical to bring that back and get the rental stock that we need built here in British Columbia. We have a plan and we will deliver on housing.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Mr. Eby, many people today will never be able to afford the same kind of housing their parents had. What do you say to those who feel upward mobility is no longer an option in British Columbia, that they have no choice but to lower their expectations when it comes to where and how they live?
Well, I believe that one of the foundational requirements for a decent life in our province is a good place to live, and that it's actually a core responsibility of anybody who wants to be premier. It's why I got into politics. This is what drives me, is making sure that you and your family have a good place to live. That was a strong contrast here. John Rustad explicitly said he doesn't think that it's the premier's job to help deliver affordable housing. Well, our plan will deliver 300,000 middle-income homes. That's what experts are saying. In addition, we're expediting construction by investing in modular housing construction so that housing can be built faster and cheaper. We're preserving lower cost rental housing so that a senior who sees that for sale sign go up out front of the rental building doesn't fear that they're going to end up in a shelter. These are basic things. And we're making sure to deliver for British Columbians on them. We've got so much more to do. Our plan to get people an opportunity to buy their first home, to address Airbnb, to address speculation, people leaving homes vacant in our market. It's delivered 20,000 homes for people, and John Rustad wants to get rid of all of those things. Doesn't make any sense.
Thanks, Mr. Eby. Ms. Firstenow, your party calls for measures to cool the market in order to make housing more affordable for everyone. But how do you do that without devaluing what is often a person's largest financial investment, their home?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for us to recognize that when people can't afford to live in British Columbia, our economy is not going to be able to be strong. We are going to see ourselves further and further away from the province that we want to be. In Victoria, rents have more than doubled in the last 7 years. We're in an emergency where people can't afford to live here. And so what we are proposing is immediately put in rent caps between tenancies. This is where the rents are being jacked up in between tenancies. It's an incentive to evict. Non-market housing, we need to build tens of thousands of units of non-market housing every year to put a check on the cost, especially of rental housing. We have a median income in BC of 44,000 people, half of $44,000. Half the people in this province earn less than $44,000. They don't have an affordable place to live. It's an emergency. We can address this in a way that protects the people of British Columbia, but we have to stop protecting real estate investment trusts and investors who have made so much money off of housing in this province.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. And now a question, the same question to all of you in terms of order. We'll start with Mr. Eby, then Ms. Firstenow, then coming back to Mr. Rustad. Here is your question. The pendulum on housing policy has swung from market-driven to much more government interventionist. Nothing appears to be working. Is it time to go back to letting the market decide, or is it time for even greater government intervention? To you first, Mr. Eby.
Thanks, Shachi. There's no one solution to the housing crisis. When somebody's looking for a place to live, they're checking Craigslist for a place they can rent. They're looking at the listings and thinking, God, I'm never going to be able to afford a house. The way we got here is so many different challenges wrapped up together. We have to go after all of them. You can't just choose one. So if you're a builder, if you're a drywaller or a painter or a carpenter, you build homes. We want you out there building to make sure that people have a chance to build a good life for themselves and their family. We don't want you tied up in endless permit processes. John Rustad's advocating. Let's get building those homes, those 300,000 middle-income homes. Sonia's right. We need to lean on the nonprofit sector. We need to have non-market housing. And we also need to be innovative, making sure, like we are with 5,000 units every year, that people can buy into market at 40% below market value, supporting them to get out of rental housing and own their first home. We've got to do all the things to support British Columbians.
Ms. Firstenow.
Neither of these other leaders want to talk about the role that financialized investors, real estate investment trusts, are playing in BC. In 20 years, 59% of rental housing was purchased by real estate investment trusts. We have global capital coming to BC, buying up housing, and it is not being used to ensure that people have a place to live. It's being used to ensure that shareholders get their profits delivered. It's something I've been asking David Eby about since 2018, when he was Minister of Housing, when he was Attorney General. What is the province going to do to put protections around the people, as opposed to letting these investment bodies turn our housing into a commodity and use it entirely for shipping profits to shareholders, who most of whom aren't even part of BC?
Thank you, Mr. Rustad.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying is 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving British Columbia because they can't afford to live here and they've got no hope to buy a house. I love my wife. I love my nieces and nephews. I miss the fact that I wasn't able to have children. But I think any parent would want to do everything they can to make sure that there's an opportunity for their kids to be able to build a future here in British Columbia. And I will ask you this, in 7 years of NDP government, has anything been better? Is housing improved? Housing has been in a crisis. We've seen a 30% decline just this year on housing starts. When I talk to people, there are tens of thousands of housing units that have started and are now defunct that are not going ahead in British Columbia. This is failure of policy. This is why the Conservatives have a common sense plan to unleash the potential of the private sector to build that housing, to build those rental units, to make sure that people can have a home here, to make sure that our kids can stay here in British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. Now time for more open debate, and we will begin this time with you, Ms. Firstenow.
John loves to talk about unleashing the private sector, which is what the BC Liberals did when he was in power, when he was part of that government in the 2000s. Unleashing the private sector means more profits for the private sector and more lack of affordability for the people in BC. John doesn't want to just unleash the private sector more in housing, which has gotten us to exactly where we are today, a housing market that is entirely run by the private sector. He wants to unleash the private sector in healthcare. He wants to put that profit margin on top of healthcare delivery. And we see what that has done in Alberta, where wait times for surgeries have gone up and numbers of surgeries have gone down and the costs have gone up. That's what unleashing the private sector looks like. That's what John Rustad wants to do.
So thank you. And when I look at unleashing the private sector, there's no question in my mind. You look at the housing in British Columbia, it was built by the private sector. The private sector has to play an important role. And it's not big companies, it's mom and pop, whether they're investing in a second home or whether they're building an extra unit. It is small business, it's small companies, it is large companies. We need the full mix in British Columbia. And the reality is, when I talk to people that want to build homes in this province, they say it takes too long. It takes 4 to 7 years or longer.
So then, John, why are you putting more red tape in their way? Why are you trying to undo?
We need to get government out of the way and make sure that we can unleash it. And this is why we have to work with municipalities, not run roughshod over them or bully them. We need to work with municipalities to get the permitting process cleaned up. You know, in Vancouver, if I could just add one quick point.
We need the housing now.
In Vancouver, they have 274 bylaws associated with housing, and over 70 people have to touch a project. It's no wonder it takes years, if not a decade, to get housing projects built.
Okay, I think Mr. Eby wants to respond.
Thanks. I met Andrew, who moved into a rental place that he could afford, was close to work, used to be an Airbnb. And when we brought in our Airbnb rules, the owner converted it to long-term rental. It was him plus 2 other people moved into long-term rentals. When we brought in the speculation and vacancy tax to deal with vacant homes, people buying homes, just leaving them empty, condos and whole houses, 20,000 British Columbians moved in and started renting those homes. These initiatives work. And housing is hard right now. It's hard for people. We got to do so much more. But can you imagine how much harder it'll be in a world where there's no restriction on Airbnb rentals, where there's no speculation and vacancy tax? John Rustad's committed. He spoke against it since 2018.
That's simply not true.
And the speculators and the investors love his plan.
Mr. Eby,
but I'm on the side of you and your family.
Simply not true. The reality is Airbnbs are licensed by municipalities. Airbnbs are zoned by municipalities. They just go up anywhere. This is something that's within local governments. But once again, David Eby's approach is just to be an authoritarian. My perspective is quite simple on this. We've seen a 30% decline in housing. This year, it's anticipated there'll be less than 17,000 housing starts in British Columbia. We need to be seeing 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts.
But John, why didn't you do that in the 16 years you were in government? We wouldn't be in this mess.
In 2017, they promised 114,000 homes. And what did they build? I think about 14,000. Now he's promising 300,000. You cannot trust David Eby to be able to deliver these numbers because he is too comfortable with
It's that neither of them are interested in protecting the affordable housing that we have. That's vacancy control. When Bill 44 and all the housing legislation that the NDP brought out last year, when Adam Olsen spent hours and hours going back and forth with Ravi Kahlon, Ravi admitted in the end, none of these measures were going to bring affordability. So let's be clear. These two don't have a plan for affordable housing. They want to talk about housing supply. They want to talk about housing starts, but they do not want to protect the affordable housing that we have. They do not want to ensure that we are making affordable housing available to people who need it right now.
Mr. Eby.
Affordable housing is important, but it's also important for people to be able to buy a place affordably. That's why we have a proposal for 5,000 units a year to get people out of the rental market into a place at 40%
Not when they're competing with real
rest
estate
assured,
investors, they're not.
if John Rustad's elected and gets rid of all of these measures,
One at a time, leaders.
so much harder.
All right, I'm going to give you a little bit more time, Mr. Rustad. We do have a bit of time if you want to briefly respond to that.
Sure. Clearly in British Columbia, 5,000 starts is not what we need. We need 30, 40, or 50,000 housing starts in British Columbia. This is why we have the Rustad rebate, so that your rent and your mortgage can be written off so that you get a rebate on that right away to make life more affordable for people in BC.
Okay, and we've got to keep moving. Lots more to get to, and now we are moving on to healthcare. Roughly 1 in 5 British Columbians either don't have a family doctor or can't get in to see one when they need to. And my first question is to you, Mr. Rustad. You've committed to expanding private healthcare delivery. How can you ensure those who can't pay have the same access to the speed and standard of care as those who can?
We are committed to universal health care in British Columbia, where it's one payer, which is the government. Government pays the bill. But we have the second most expensive healthcare system, and we're getting second worst outcomes. We are in a crisis in BC. We're in a crisis. ER rooms are closed all across this province. In the city of Merritt, between now and Christmas, it's anticipated there'll be 32 more days of closure of an ER room. It could take 8, 10, 12 hours or longer to wait for emergency rooms. People have died waiting in emergency rooms. There was a lady, she was in labor. She went into the hospital and she miscarried in the washroom and sat there with covered in blood, waiting for hours for services in an emergency room. That is David Eby's healthcare in BC. And quite frankly, it really tears me apart and it makes me upset. We need to be able to make sure that we're retaining our doctors, that we're bringing back the healthcare workers that were let go. We need to make sure we have a model in this province where doctors want to stay here and work, where people can come in and we can unleash the full potential of family doctors. We need to be able to make sure we deal with training and the people coming into our province. There's so much that needs to be done on healthcare, and it's not happening under David Eby.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rustad. To you, Mr. Eby, third-party delivery exists in Australia, in the UK, in Germany, and it's already here in British Columbia. In coming out so strongly against alternative care models, including privatization, are you putting ideology above the needs of British Columbians?
No, not at all, Shachi. When people need care, we're going to make sure we're doing everything we can to deliver care. That story that John just told is horrific. Every British Columbian deserves high quality care no matter where you are in the province. People who are, when we weren't hitting cancer treatment timelines, we reached down to Bellingham and we retained a private clinic to be able to make sure that people were getting the care that they need. It's not about ideology. We have a shortage of healthcare workers. We got to train up more healthcare workers.
So private healthcare is faster and better.
Healthcare workers who want to work in our province from other parts of Canada, from other countries. We're leading the country in recruiting healthcare professionals. We've got to do more. And I'll tell you, we're not going to get there by cutting the healthcare system. It's John Rustad's proposal. He keeps releasing numbers consistent with cutting billions of dollars from our healthcare system. He hasn't released his costed platform. We got to hire more doctors and nurses. We can't be competing with the private sector who's going to pay those same doctors and nurses more. And then all of a sudden, you have to pay more to access those doctors and nurses. That's why we're opening a new medical school in Surrey to train up community healthcare workers, doctors and nurses to work across BC, incentives for working in rural BC, and provisional license so those professionals can get to work right away.
Thanks, Mr. Eby. Ms. Furstenau, you've described the current healthcare system as a bloated bureaucracy. You're also campaigning on establishing an integrated community health center in every riding in British Columbia. So how exactly do you plan to do that without adding to said health bureaucracy?
Well, the great thing about community health centers is that they don't actually need heavy bureaucracy on top of them the way that UPCCs, the invention of the NDP, do. The NDP seem to have approached healthcare with the idea that there's nothing that one more VP and 7 more project managers can't solve, when in fact what we have to do is ensure that healthcare spending is being focused on the delivery of healthcare by the professionals who were trained to do it, healthcare professionals in our province. We've seen the corporatization of healthcare under the NDP. We've seen the growth of TELUS, Health Plus. They were investigated only because the BC Greens wouldn't relent on asking the questions of why they were allowed to double bill. We've seen the growth of agency nurses. We see that both of these two parties are aligned on corporate delivery of healthcare, whereas with community health centers, you treat it like we treat the public education system. There's the infrastructure, the doctors, the nurse practitioners, nurses, allied health professionals build their team. We have 30 of these operating in BC already. They're hugely successful. We can get 93 up and running because it's the model that we use for our MLA offices. It's totally possible.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. Same question to all of you now, starting again with Ms. Firstenow, then Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby. Here's your question. The super senior wave is here. People 85 and older represent one of the fastest growing age groups in British Columbia. Options for long-term palliative or in-home care are often limited. Many people have no help. Others can only rely on their children or neighbors. What is your plan, Ms. Firstenow, first to ensure the dignity and care to those who have given so much to this province?
Yeah, you know, we've had a shortage of long-term thinking. We've had a shortage of governments who look at demographics, who prepare for what's coming, who try to avert crises. And now we are seeing a lot of people, a lot of seniors who aren't getting the care they need. We had the report from the Seniors Advocate, A Billion Reasons to Care, that showed a huge amount of public funding going to especially for-profit seniors care, where that money wasn't being used for delivery of care to service to seniors. It was being used for administration. It was being used for renovations. And so number one, we need a government that takes seriously how public money is being used to support seniors. And we need to make sure that that is being used properly. And number two, we have to find ways to support seniors at home. The best place for seniors to age is age in place. And it's horrifying right now, the story that a 95-year-old man has been evicted from his home to a hospital.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you. And I need to clear the air here. We're going to be adding about $3.8 billion in healthcare spending over the next 3 years. David Eby continues to perpetuate a lie. And I just wanted to be clear on that. When it comes to seniors and what needs to be done with seniors care in this province, we've laid out a very comprehensive plan. Everything from building more long-term care facilities in this province, a commitment of 5,000 new beds. But more than that, we need to work with seniors and we need to work with families to be able to support them at home. That's why we're going to create tax credits that are available. We're going to expand services at home. A nurse came to me in my riding and she told me this story, and she goes home in tears because she's been going out and she's talking to seniors and they're saying, can you please get some help? And she's saying, there's none available. I'm so sorry. That is wrong. Seniors need to be treated with respect. We need to work to be able to support them at home because we know that's where the best outcomes are. There's much more we need to do. We're expanding the SAFER program, shelter aid for elderly residents. There's a lot more that can be done and that we have a plan to be able to deliver.
Mr. Eby.
Well, you know, it's hard to listen to John Rustad. He was in government for 16 years. And seniors who lived in long-term care homes didn't get a bath once a week. The vast majority of long-term care homes didn't meet even minimum provincial standards for care and dignity. And now he says, oh, if you send me back, I'm going to be different this time. I'm not going to cut the healthcare system. I'm not going to fire the workers who care for the seniors. The largest firing of healthcare workers happened when John Rustad was in government, and he voted for it against seniors. You deserve care at home for as long as you can be at home. That's why we've expanded home care. Our hospital at home program means you can get hospital-like care at home in BC, the first time in our province. And we've got a lot more to do, but we're meeting standards for seniors in long-term care, and we're going to keep doing that, something John Rustad never did.
So we're throwing to open debate. We're starting with Mr. Rustad. Do you want to respond to what Mr. Eby just said?
I mean, first of all, what David Eby just said is not true.
90% of care homes didn't meet standards.
And I can tell you something, the care homes that were built and that were renovated in British Columbia were renovated to the standards of the day. They were good quality facilities that were built. But here's the real key in my mind.
For other people.
When you look forward at what needs to happen going forward, David Eby cannot defend the record that he has and the damage that is being done in BC, especially for seniors. Seniors need that respect and care. They can't get a doctor. When an emergency room's closed, does a senior have to go an hour and a half, 2.5 hours down the road for the next one? And that is David Eby's record. We need to make sure that those services are there and available. We also need to make sure that we're coming into their homes, providing support and working with families to make sure that support's there.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, when we were all rolling up our sleeves to get vaccines to protect vulnerable seniors from COVID-19, Bonnie Henry was working night and day to keep us
writing
safe
books
during the pandemic.
Writing books, firing healthcare workers.
John Rustad and his
Wearing flu
candidates
blogs.
were providing donations to people who were protesting outside of hospitals, anti-vax convoy members. He's still an anti-vaxxer. He appeared in front of a group of people that called the
Got a
so-called,
vaccine.
you called it the
He's
so-called
got
COVID
3.
vaccine. You said you wish you'd never been
That's just
vaccinated.
not true.
And then when someone said, do you think that public health professionals should be tried like Nazi war criminals? You said, well, we wouldn't do
there
that
you
in
go.
BC, but we would support an international effort to do
So
that,
look,
John.
it's
It's
clear.
embarrassing.
Yeah,
You know,
Of
I
course
wouldn't
he doesn't
fire
want to
Bonnie
hear that.
Henry. I'm trying to
He
hire
would be the guy
you
on
and
trial.
your family, a family doctor. We connected
And Bonnie.
250,000 people to family doctors. We've got so much more to do. But if you think that we'll be safer in our province with someone who doesn't
Let
believe
Mr.
that
Rustad
vaccines
respond.
were
Thank you very
in
much.
charge of things,
Let Mr.
Thank you.
Let him
Thank you
See
very
how
much.
he handles this.
The reality is I'm triple vaccinated. The reality is in British Columbia, I also promoted and supported people getting vaccinated, especially for seniors in our communities. I was supportive of that. However, I am not anti-vax. I am anti-mandate. I believe that people should have choice. It shouldn't be thrust upon them and forced upon them
Talk
or
about your-
coerced to be able to take a vaccine.
You never know which
People
John Rustad's
need
going to show
make
up.
sure-
Look, when
When he's
I
talking
talk
to supporters,
Mr.
he
Eby, let
says,
Miss-
I
let
regret
Miss
getting the
Furstenau-
vaccine. Tonight, now he's proud to
I'll
be
explain that to you if you like.
You never know. You never
I
know
don't
who
expect
you're
that
talking
these
to.
two are door knocking, but I am, and I'm talking to a lot of seniors in Victoria. And what I hear from seniors are the concerns that they have around losing their affordable housing. That is the number one concern I've heard from seniors. And then I hear from seniors who don't have access to primary care. And what these two are not focused on is protecting that affordable housing, protecting that right to live and age in place that seniors want to have after having contributed to our society, paid their taxes their whole life. They want a government that is going to have their back. And that's not what they feel right now. And then they want to make sure that they do have primary care. And what has not happened under the NDP is the solutions to the primary care crisis. UPCCs are twice as expensive as meeting a family doctor, and they do not work to solve this crisis. There's one really important factor. They'll keep talking about, we're going to get more doctors, we're going to train more doctors. BC has more family doctors per capita than the rest of the country. They're just not willing to work in this broken system. We want to make a primary public healthcare system that doctors want to work in, that healthcare professionals want to work in, and that will serve the people of BC.
There's a great desire for both these leaders to come back in.
Clear in my mind that keeping seniors at home as best we can and support them is the right thing to do. In 2022, I lost my father, I lost my father-in-law, and I lost my mother in that year. But we were able to keep them in their home right to the end because we were able to support with family. There was not the level of care, unfortunately, for many, many seniors that are out there to be able to do that. And we know that when seniors can stay in their home, their quality of life is much better. And for me, we were able to provide that quality of life for my parents. But I know many families can't. And that's where we need to be able to make sure we're supporting those families to be able to stay in their homes.
Okay, I'm going to allow you to come back in, Mr. Eby, and I'll give you a little bit more time.
Thanks. These are huge challenges that we face in our healthcare system. You know, when John Rustad was in government in 2010, they said, we're going to make sure everyone gets a GP. A GP
14 years ago.
5 years later, fewer people had a family doctor than when the program started. We're actually making progress on getting
you kicked them out of the hospital.
Doctors. We're supporting you and your family. And we believe in the science of things like vaccines. We don't have a candidate that says the vaccines give you AIDS. We don't support anti-vax convoy members. We believe that science works and it keeps us safe with things like vaccinations.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. We're now moving on to our next section, which is the opioid crisis and public safety. It has been the better part of a decade since BC first declared a public health emergency over drug-related deaths. Since then, more than 15,000 people have died, and on average, between 6 and 7 people die every day. My first question is to Ms. Furstenau. Ms. Furstenau, you plan to continue safe supply. You talk about prevention and reducing stigma, but how do you tell people, especially young people, about the risks of using hard drugs while simultaneously trying to destigmatize?
Yeah, it's really important that young people get good information, they get reliable information. We've seen in programs in the United States, in middle schools, in high schools, where when young people get the information that gives them everything they need to know about the risks and dangers, especially of opioids and hard drugs, there's a 66% decline in use of amongst young people. That's what we should be aiming for. The other thing that young people need, and I had a friend of mine who's 18 reading me some statistics this afternoon saying that Girls are saying that their mental health is worse than it's ever been. We need counselors in schools. We need enough EAs in schools. Kids need to feel supported in their schools. Prevention is critical. But it's interesting that David Eby says he listens to Bonnie Henry when it comes to COVID and when it comes to that public health emergency, but he rejects her advice when it comes to this public health emergency that has claimed 15,000 people's lives. There needs to be a regulated pharmaceutical alternative to the toxic drugs that are being distributed by organized crime in our streets. And that's the advice from the provincial health officer to this government.
Okay, that's time. Thank you, Ms. First. And now to you, Mr. Rustad. As you know, homelessness and addiction often go hand in hand. You say you'll clear tent encampments. You say you won't hesitate to close overdose prevention sites. Instead, you're focusing on drug-free housing, which currently does not exist at the scale you would need. Won't your policies simply drive more vulnerable people into the streets?
There's no question when you look at this crisis of overdoses and drug addictions in British Columbia, it is horrendous what is happening here. Last year, just over 5,700 people died in Canada. Close to half of those were in British Columbia, 2,500 people in British Columbia alone. Clearly what that means is the policies in this province are not working. If you look at any other province by any other measure, they are performing better than we are in British Columbia. So we need to take a different approach. We need to make sure that we bring an end to decriminalization and safe supply. We need to bring an end to this, to the government being a drug dealer, quite frankly. What we need to do in British Columbia is build out recovery. And yes, you're right, there is significant investment that's needed, and we're going to make those investments. Everything from doctor-prescribed treatment to short-term recovery to longer-term recovery and to involuntary, compassionate recovery. These are things that need to be done. We're going to build out this capacity. But I'll tell you the story of Christian, who was a 13-year-old, and when he was first addicted and not told by his parents did everything they possibly could to try to get help for him. He eventually passed away when he was 28. And when I talked to the mom said, I asked the government to try to help me and they refused. They didn't even answer the phone.
That's time. Okay, Mr. Eby, thank you. I am going to come back around and invite you to answer the substance of the question. We've heard you on the things that need to be done. Heard that. However, as we pointed out in the question, the capacity that you're talking about does not meet the scale at this time. In closing tent encampments, in closing safe consumption sites and other use sites, are you not driving drug-addicted people back into the streets? Where exactly do you expect them to go? I will give you 30 seconds to respond.
Thank you. We need to make sure that there's three distinct groups. There's those that are down on their luck. There's those that have addictions and those that have mental health. We need to make sure that we have housing and available for those people that need it and down on their luck. When we have people with addiction, we need to make sure that we deal with detox, get them into a place where we can put them in housing for recovery and make sure we have that. It needs to be built out. And of course, with mental health, we have to make sure those supports are there. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk more about that in the future.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Eby, in the 7 years your government has been in power, people around British Columbia have seen their communities scarred by the toxic drug and mental health crises. Tent cities and street crime have become common. How do you respond to those who say your policies, including the experiment to decriminalize public drug consumption, have only made things worse?
I like she said experiment.
That's a really awful crisis. I listened to the story of Christian and the struggle of his parents to get him support. Anyone who's lost a child or a parent or a loved one or a friend, and there are so many people, there are very few people who haven't been directly affected by this, knows the scale of the human tragedy and that it's urgent. And it's led us to try things that were unimaginable at certain points. Who would have imagined that there would be an all-party committee and the police chiefs lining up, say, let's try decriminalization. Let's try removing stigma so that people can come forward and ask for help. They don't worry about getting arrested or losing their job. And so we tried it, and it didn't produce the results that anybody wanted. Instead of people feeling like they could come forward, people struggling with brain injuries, mental health issues, and addictions felt like they could use drugs anywhere in the province. So we had to change course. This is a hard problem. It won't be solved with simple slogans. We got to do that. We actually need to take on this problem head on. We have opened hundreds of new treatment beds. We're providing support for youth like Christian, Vancouver Island, the Orca-Lalem site. We've got so much more to do.
Support like Crystal.
We'll do everything it takes to to make sure that we're
That
supporting
too.
people in recovery however
Yeah.
we can.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Same question to all of you. Throughout this campaign, you've been largely focused on what to do once toxic drugs are already in our communities. To each of you, what is your plan to address the role of organized crime and the constant flow of drugs through our ports and other places? We begin with Mr. Rustad, then Mr. Eby, finally Ms. Furstenau.
Thank you. There's no question in my mind that our ports are wide open. The German report has said that less than 1% of containers in the British Columbia are actually checked. The federal government exited the scene in 1997, and the problem has only gotten worse under David Eby. And I suggested, and I still move forward the plan, that we are going to strengthen our port police. We're going to actually make sure that that force is there and available to be able to do that work. David Eby said, oh, you can't do that. It's federal. Watch us. We're going to make sure that we crack down on these ports. We're going to bring an end to the organized crime, the drugs and the guns that are coming through our ports. We're going to help work with the federal government to strengthen our borders right around. We're going to do everything we can to actually even go after the components that go into making these drugs so that we can get these dangerous drugs off our streets. They're killing people on a regular basis. This needs to happen, and a Conservative government's going to make sure that we put the resources there to end our ports being wide open and to bring an end to this crisis.
Mr. Eby.
Thanks, Chachi. You know, again, difficult to listen to John Rustad on this critically important issue of organized crime in our province. You know, when John was in government, gangsters brought hockey bags full of unmarked bills to BC casinos. They laundered money with impunity. They used our court system to enforce those same gambling debts. Government had no interest in taking that on. And now John Rustad has actually announced that he's not even going to enforce federal gun laws in British Columbia. He's going to direct the police, and this isn't just one time or twice, it's 3 times, including in the radio debate we participated in. He will direct the police not to enforce federal gun laws that prevent abusers from accessing guns, that prevent gangsters from buying and selling handguns and semi-automatic weapons. It's ridiculous. And now he says he's going to get tough on crime. Give me a break. John, you have to go with the gangsters. You have to take their cars and their houses and their guns and enforce the law, and that's what we're going to do.
What have you been doing?
I'm a gangster now?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems we have is that
all that self that
people
you
are
make
being
on the farm.
abandoned to homelessness. There isn't solutions for them. Mayors are asking the provincial government, have been asking the provincial government to step up and play the role that they're supposed to play, to have a social safety net, to ensure that people aren't living outside and gathered in an area where it's very easy for organized crime to find them and to sell them substances that are very dangerous and often deadly. We have an example in Duncan. 4 years it's been operating. It's been a proven success model. It's the village site. It gets people into homes. It gets them wraparound services. It gets them connection, belonging, community, employment, and it keeps them away from organized crime. This is what should be scaled up everywhere in this province. This is how we solve this crisis.
That's true.
Thank you. And now time for open debate. Mr. Eby, we'll start with you.
Thanks. You know, I think it's critically important on an issue as challenging as the toxic drug crisis to be frank with British Columbians. We're going to have to try different things. We're going to have to do different things to get at this and provide people the support that they need. And it's not okay to play politics with it, John. It's not okay to say to one community when you're in Richmond, to the Chinese community, we're going to close the overdose prevention sites. We're going to close them, the drug dens, you called them. And then later on, you say, well, actually, we're not going to close them. We're just going to change the name. And then your critic, Eleanor Sturko, comes out and she says, well, actually, we're going to expand them. We're going to put additional services. People need to know what the plan is. These are hard issues. Lives are on the line. This is not a simple fix. It's not solved with a tweet, and it's sure not solved by pretending to one community instead of addressing it head on.
This first to know,
We
then
keep
Mr.
hearing from both John and David, and as an MLA, from parents who say exactly what we're hearing. I needed to get help for my child. My child needed mental health support. My child was in crisis. I couldn't find anything. There's one child psychiatrist in all of Cowichan. We are not creating a voluntary care system. We are not creating a mental health care system that meets people's needs before they're in crisis. And we don't have a plan from either of these two leaders to ensure that people have access to psychologists under MSP, which is something we've been pushing for 3 years, that people have access to child psychologists, that kids know that the counselors are there for them, so that we are avoiding these terrible crises that kids are finding themselves in, and parents saying, I can't find
British
help for my
Columbia,
child.
In British Columbia, David Eby has had 7 years. And what has the results been? We have seen, for example, in Surrey, where people are being blackmailed and threatened on a regular basis. We're seeing gangs and gang activity happening at an extraordinary level, people being killed by these gangs.
John,
we have not seen any action that has actually taken anything. And David Eby, we have seen in some of these safe supply locations, we have actually seen people arrested and distributing drugs in those facilities. These sort of things need to be shut down when that happens. We have to have a zero tolerance policy for this type of an approach in British Columbia. He has done nothing. He has not even addressed the facilities where there was a problem like that. And the police had to go in and seize the drugs and arrest people.
British Columbians need to know where you stand on these issues. When you go and you call them drug dens and you say, I'm going to close all the overdose prevention sites to one community, and then you go to another community and you say something, when you're talking to a guy whose life was saved 5 times, let me finish, John, this is important. When you're talking to a guy whose life was saved 5 times at an overdose prevention site, and you tell him, actually, don't worry, we're not going to close them, we're just going to change the name. That kind of disingenuous politics is exactly what we don't need in the toxic drug crisis.
What we need to be doing here is where you have somebody who ODs and is brought back to life. Clearly, they are not making the right decisions for themselves. We need, as a government, to be able to be compassionate about it and get them into treatment.
These
get them into involuntary
on
treatment
people
so that
not
they can
being served
be able
by
to
the
recover.
systems that should have prevented these crises. These two want to focus on the worst place that people can be in crisis: homeless, in despair, using substances that are so dangerous. What they don't want to focus on are the lack of investments under the BC Liberals, the cutting back of services that got us here. And they don't want to focus on the fact that for the last 7 years, the NDP have not responded to this crisis in a way that actually averts it. I want us to have a war on poverty. I want us to address the social conditions that are creating these outcomes. I want us to make sure that in BC, we don't have Lamborghinis driving down a road where people are living on the streets. These are solvable problems. We just haven't had the political will to either prevent them or solve them from either of these two parties.
Sonia's right. We do need to support people to make sure that they don't go down this path as much as possible. It's part of our commitment and the work we're doing in our education system to expand access to educational assistants and counselors in every single school. They intervene early.
One counselor per school is not going to cut it. One counselor per school is not. I've been in schools. When you have a population of 1,500 kids in one school, one counselor is not enough. We need counselors there for kids when they need them.
Leaders, I do have to keep us to time, and that is time for this section. Our next theme deals with Indigenous rights and land use. Earlier this year, the province paused amendments to the Land Act, which would have shared decision-making powers with First Nations. The first question is to you, Mr. Eby. Your proposed Land Act changes have faced criticism over impacts on individual land rights, treaty negotiations, and major resource developments, including those supported by First Nations. If you win this election, will you again attempt to amend the Land Act?
No, we won't, Sonia. And
really?
The reason is that we need to make sure that we have the confidence of British Columbians in doing this critically important work. We can't spend a bunch of money on lawyers fighting Indigenous people in court all the way through to the Supreme Court of Canada and back and forth. We're not ending up any further ahead. It brings uncertainty, it brings a loss of investment, and it brings a lack of improvement in conditions for First Nations people in the province. We've got to work in partnership. I'm very frank about that, because I know that when we work with Indigenous people, we lift the conditions for Indigenous people across the province in BC, but we also improve the lives of the regions around them. And so when I think about mining, for example, in the Northwest, the Tahltan, major mine under construction right now, 1,800 jobs. It's a cooperative partnership between the Tahltan and the mining company. It's the future in the province, not fighting in court. And what John Rustad is doing, spreading division. Some of the candidates openly racist to Indigenous people, denying the history of residential schools. Paul Ratchford in my own constituency on Orange Shirt Day saying he won't wear an orange shirt because he won't misrepresent Canadian history.
Yeah.
Candidates he's running, we don't
It's
need
just a
division.
shirt.
We need to work together.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Eby. To Mr. Rustad, the Declaration
That's
on the
not
Rights of
racist.
Indigenous Peoples Act was passed by all parties 5 years ago. You say you may repeal it. Is that for certain? Be specific. Under what conditions would you do so?
Thank you, Sachi. When we look at British Columbia and we look at First Nations in British Columbia, they've been held back economically for far too long. We need to be able to unleash their potential. We need to make sure that they can fully participate in the economy. We make sure that economic reconciliation can be a reality. And I've witnessed this firsthand as I signed 435 agreements with First Nations. I witnessed this firsthand when I see the difference it makes to people on the ground and to what's going on in our province. And so my perspective on this, and our Conservative Party looks at British Columbia, working with First Nations, lifting them up, making sure that we can help fulfill those opportunities for them. And when there is legislation in place that creates friction between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, I think that's wrong. That is not reconciliation. So we need to be able to move beyond that. When you look at the debate in the UN on the United Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, we want to bring that to life in terms of how we work with First Nations. You look at the debate, you look at the intention, that's how we will utilize UNDRIP in British Columbia. DRIPper legislation, the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act, has caused friction in this province, and it needs to be replaced with what makes sense so that we are not creating the divisions amongst people, but instead we're making sure that both Indigenous and non-Indigenous life have the opportunity to be able to fully participate and benefit from a growing and expanding economy.
Thank you, Mr. Rustad. To Ms. Firstenow, your platform says Indigenous governments have decision-making authority over their lands. But how do you reconcile this when economically independent First Nations who want to log old growth forests, or they want to support pipeline projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, for so long in this province, these are the only options that have been given to First Nations. And the kind of economic reconciliation that John Rustad is talking about are the benefits agreements that he entered into with First Nations that were colonial and paternalistic, that identified how the money could be spent if those proceeds went to First Nations, that ensured that First Nations couldn't criticize a project, that ensured that the people of those nations couldn't speak out. What we need is to recognize that the courts have been telling governments across Canada, and especially here in BC, that rights and title for First Nations exist, and the courts have been directing governments to do the work to sort that out at a negotiating table, not, as David said, spend millions and tens of millions of dollars on legal fees, fighting battles that the provincial government always loses, because the courts have been consistent on this, and the courts want governments to create certainty, to create consistency, and to ensure that we're doing the hard but essential work of reconciliation with First Nations.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. And now the same question to all of you, beginning with Mr. Eby. Time and again, the courts have ruled in favor of Aboriginal titles. So when you, as Premier, are in a situation where you are negotiating over what to do with Crown land, which is considered public land, whose interests are you prioritizing?
Well, that's a critically important question, Shachi. Thank you. And the best way I can describe it to you is to talk to you about the agreement we did with the Haida people. You know, recognizing Haida title, everybody knew the government wasn't going to win in court. Haida have been there since time immemorial. They've got their own governance. They've been looking after different functions. And so when we entered into an agreement with the Haida, it was to make sure that we were sitting down as partners at a table with shared responsibility. We're going to work it out. We're not going to go to court. And that's what we did. That's how we got to an agreement with the Haida. And you know, when we went to the legislature, John Rustad stood up, he looked in the eyes of the Haida elders, and he said, yes, this is the right thing to do. I went and I talked to the Attorney General. We never were going to win a court. But then as soon as he got outside the legislature, he hit social media, he said, hey, the Haida are coming for your private property. A total lie, a total fiction, and an example of the kind of divisive politics that our province does not need.
Ms. Firstenow.
Well, it's really critical that we create certainty in this province, that it's long-term, and that we recognize, again, what the courts have indicated for us to do and what government should be doing. to politicize this the way that the Conservatives did, and to really not do the work properly, because the NDP did not work with the people of BC, did not demonstrate that. But when you ask whose interests on Crown land are being protected, for so long in this province, Crown land has been handed over for resource extraction by industries, and they have extracted enormous wealth. They have extracted our resources. They have come in and done boom and bust economics over and over again. And whose interests were not protected were the long-term interests of British Columbians. We now have a devastated landscape. We have so much damage that has come, and the wealth has left our province.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. When you see economic reconciliation on BC, you see both Indigenous and non-Indigenous be able to prosper. And I'll give you the Haisla, for example. They went from 65% unemployment to 15% unemployment. There's so many nations that have engaged economically that have been able to change lives and make that difference for people. And I think, quite frankly, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike want to see that happen on the landscape. I have gone out and I've talked and all the agreements that I've done and seen the difference it makes. And when it comes to Haida, or to the Haida Gwaii and the Haida people, I fully support addressing title. It needed to happen. It's the right thing to do. But private land and infrastructure should never have been put on the table, not without engaging with the people and making sure that you're in a situation. By coming forward and doing it, ultimately, you're going to end up with Indigenous law applying to your private property. We need to make sure that everybody's at the table if you want to achieve true reconciliation.
Okay, time now for open debate. Ms. Firstenow, we begin with you. Mr. Eby, I see you shaking your head. You may engage once you've had a moment to speak.
Look, it's fascinating to me that John Rustad's vision for this province is one that's rooted somewhere around 1957. I mean, he cannot look ahead because he can only look back. He is so limited in his imagination of what's possible. And when it comes to reconciliation, when it comes to sorting out rights and title, what we have to do, the hard but essential work we have to do, all John Rustad can do is look back to when he was Minister of Indigenous Relations, and what he wanted to do was visit First Nations that had golf courses. He is not seriously taking this issue and recognizing the serious work of a provincial government is not to politicize this, not to make people afraid, but to recognize that to move forward, to create economic certainty, to create economic prosperity for everybody in BC, this issue has to be sorted out.
Well, look at what the Squamish Nation are doing at the foot of the Burrard Street Bridge. You know, this was a reserve property that was stolen from them by the government. The Squamish were kicked off, and that property sat vacant for many years. It was given back by the federal government. What they did was they're building hundreds and hundreds of units of rental housing for the whole community. We all benefit from that. This work actually improves and increases prosperity for everyone. And John wants to say it wants to take something away from you. It wants to take your private property away from you. Nothing could be further from the truth. So, there were private property owners from Haida Gwaii, business owners who came to support that because the certainty, knowing the path forward, makes their businesses and their communities more valuable, more prosperous.
Mr. Rustad,
First Nations people are not coming for your backyards.
Thank you. What we need to see in this province is an opportunity for everybody to be able to prosper. There's no question there. That's one of the reasons why, as part of economic reconciliation, we are actually going to look at the strategic the return of land to First Nations people.
The heck?
It needs to happen. This is rights and title.
He moved out of frame.
And he goes like, Section 35 of our Constitution. So we will be engaged with First Nations, but we want to make sure that what we're doing with First Nations is creating those opportunities for success. I have seen it when I have a young lady that comes to me and says, I'd like to give you a meat offering. And I say, what for? Because you put a program in place that gave me some training. I got my first job. I was living on the street as a single mom. I had my child on the street. I couldn't look after my child. Now I have a job, I'm back doing some training, I have another job, and I just want to say thank you. That is what economic reconciliation is, connecting with people, making sure they have an opportunity to build a future and look after the kids. That's what any parent would want in the province. That's what we need to deliver when we're working with First Nations in BC.
Well, I don't know if I would compare a relationship with First Nations to parent and child. I would compare it as a partnership, as a true partnership. We're working together to build a province here. And when we work together, amazing things happen. some of the most successful projects in this province are joint projects with Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, and it improves life in the whole community. John, I just can't disagree with you more that your first action would be to repeal a law that just recognizes the rights that we know Indigenous people have in this province. Why would you pick a fight with Indigenous people as one of your first steps? We got to work together.
Because John just wants to take us back to the 20th century. It's where he feels most comfortable. It's where he feels that we should be going. He cannot see a future that's different from the one in the past that he's had. And he cannot see a future that's unlike what the BC Liberals created when he was a cabinet minister in their government. This is a man who lacks imagination,
Let
who
Mr.
lacks the
Rustad
capacity to see a better
hundreds of
future.
agreements with First Nations, over 400.
We have that honor and the trust of people in this province, is actually to get rid of a lot of the waste and excess that this government is spending money on. They have expanded the budget by 70% and delivered nothing. 7 years and nothing has improved. We need to change course and make sure that we put people first in BC.
Okay, we do have to leave it there and move on to our next theme, which is about the future of British Columbia. The first question to you, Ms. Firstenow. We're living with the effects of climate change every day. Fires, floods, and this summer, no BC grown peaches. At the same time, the reality remains this province relies on resource-based industries. Between 2017 and 2020, your party held up an NDP government. Tell us, what did the BC Greens actually do to transition BC's fiscal future away from fossil fuels?
Yeah, we did have a confidence in supply agreement with the BC NDP, and when they brought forward a piece of legislation to give LNG Canada, at that time, over $6 billion in subsidies, we voted against it. But who voted with them? The BC Liberals. This is where John and David are aligned. They're aligned on subsidizing fossil fuels. They're aligned on building more LNG infrastructure in BC. They're aligned on continuing to drag us back to a fossil fuel age when the rest of the world is moving forward, when we will not be able to meet our emissions. And it's interesting that David's been asking about which John Rustad. Before he became premier, David Eby said, we cannot meet our climate targets and continue to build any more fossil fuel infrastructure. But under the NDP, we've gone from 0 LNG facilities to a potential of 7. We have a government that is all in on a fuel that is now proven to be worse than coal, that the International Energy Agency has said will leave BC behind because the demand will be gone. We need a clean energy future for BC, and the only party focused on that truly are the BC Greens.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. To you, Mr. Rustad. You've promised a lot of changes that aren't actually under BC jurisdiction. Repealing taxes on tips is federal law. The courts have ruled you can't just clear away homeless camps, and you say you'll bring back those plastic straws. Are you promising things that a BC government alone can't actually deliver?
So we're very proud of the fact that we just need to get rid of the stuff that sucks in BC. Paper straws suck. I'm sorry, we've got to get rid of those. It doesn't work for people in BC.
You know what?
There's
That's a great
little
slogan.
meme I
Get rid
saw
of the stuff
where there
that
was 2
sucks.
lines of white powder,
Paper straws
supposedly
suck.
cocaine, and a plastic straw,
NDP
and the bottom
sucks.
sign said, one of these is illegal in BC. And that to me tells a great story in terms of David Eby's British Columbia. When we look at tips and what has happened in British Columbia, of course we can't impact what's going on the federal side, but we can categorize it and make sure that it's not taxed from a provincial side. And it's easy enough to be able to do that in terms of computer technology today to do it. It's the right thing to do for people who are serving, people who need that extra little boost to make sure we have that sort of money available. These are the types of initiatives we need to do to be able to help people in British Columbia, not to put barriers and struggles in front of people in British Columbia. So we're actually very aggressive in everything that we need to do in this province because things aren't working. It's been 7 years, Mr. Eby, and he has not been able to deliver for people in BC. We need change, and that common sense change is what the Conservatives will deliver for BC.
Mr. Eby, you've spent a lot of time in this campaign, a significant part of your platform talking about John Rustad.
Yeah.
Are you more focused on him than your own plans for the next 4 years?
Thanks, Shachi. Not at all. But
Scared.
it's important that British Columbians know who's running in the election and what their positions are. And John Rustad, he's avoiding debates. He refused to debate on the island. He won't take follow-up questions from reporters. He doesn't get back to media outlets when they ask questions that he doesn't like.
You've never
Answering questions
responded
is
to
not
me
optional
once,
if you're
Evie.
applying for
Not
the top
once.
job
Excuse
in British
me.
Columbia. And you got to answer the questions. And when you're a climate change denier, when you say that the science behind climate change, the same science that's predicting this massive hurricane off the coast of Florida is false, that it's a hoax and a lie and people have been tricked. How do you lead a province whose massive advantage is clean electricity? Some of the lowest carbon products available. Sonia says no fossil fuel development at all. I say if it's net zero by 2030, lifting up Indigenous people like Chief Smith and the Haisla, then we can do it. John says let her rip. We got to be better than that. This isn't about plastic straws. That's the least we can do to tell our kids that we're moving in the right direction. Developing our electricity and hydrogen, it's the path forward.
Okay, thank
kids
you.
hate plastic straws.
Same question to
the
all of
kids
you,
hate
beginning
paper
with
straws
Mr.
too.
Rustad. You all know the financial situation the province is in. Each of you has a platform filled with expensive promises, new bridges, SkyTrain expansions, and a lot more. How are you going to pay for it? Mr. Rustad.
Thanks very much. There's no question we need to get our economy going in British Columbia. We have seen the fact that British Columbia is almost cut in half in terms of our economic performance under the NDP over the last 7 years versus what it was prior to that. We have seen almost zero private sector job growth in British Columbia. We're running, and now if David Eby gets in, $24 billion worth of deficits over the next 3 years. This is unaffordable in BC. We need to unleash the potential of this province. We have our forest sector that is in shambles. 2/3 of it's being lost. We have to get the feet back under the forest sector. We have 17 mines that need to be opened up. It takes 2 years in Sweden to open a mine. It takes 12 to 15 years in BC. We've got to get this red tape out of the way. We have to make sure that our economy can get humming. We have to make sure we clear out this bureaucracy and red tape as part of it so that we can generate the revenue we need. We're going to make strategic investments. We're going to continue to make those strategic investments, but we have to be able to get that economy going to be able to afford it.
Mr. Eby.
Well, I mean, there was a lot there. Look, British Columbia is the fastest growing province economically of any of the big provinces since we formed government, since the pandemic, and last calendar year. We're growing faster than the other big provinces. But until you feel at home, that reality that we're growing doesn't matter. That's why it's good that we have the fastest growing wages, one of the lowest unemployment rates, and actually, contrary to what John just said, we're one of the leaders in Canada in private sector job creation. But we got to keep going. And we've got to make sure that people have the chance to get the training to take those jobs. You know, I met a young man who he was moving boxes around in a warehouse for $20 an hour. He got a welding course, an apprenticeship. Now his top wage is $62 an hour. That's why we're doubling apprenticeships in the province, to give people the chance to build a good life for themselves and their family.
Thank you, Mr. Eby. Ms. Firstenow.
I remember the conversations during COVID in 2020, where we talked about building back better, where we talked about a more fair economy, where we talked about addressing the growing inequality and the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And yet in the 4 years since then, we've seen that gap widen. We've seen inequality become a bigger problem. We've seen deep poverty become a bigger problem. There was a panel that had Mary Polak, Bowen Ma, and me, all three parties agreeing that we have to find a way to tax wealth. And that's what we're proposing in our platform. A 18% tax on profits over $1 billion. A 0.2% increase on school tax on properties over $3 million, and a 12.5% marginal tax on incomes over $350,000, and then taxing all assets, all real estate assets, looking at that whole wealth and making sure we're capturing that wealth and taxing it properly.
Thank you, Ms. Firstenow. To open debate, you're first, Mr. Eby.
Well, I think it's a prerequisite. Frankly, I think it should have been a prerequisite to walk into this room, that you have a costed platform. Now, yeah, government budgets are under pressure right now, just like household budgets. We're at the bottom of the economic cycle. But we're not going to make people pay for that. They need support now. That's why we're expanding programs for people. And we're making sure that, you know, with our costed platform, you see declining deficits over time. We're going to return to balance. But we're not going to make you pay for it. John, you haven't released a costed platform. An economist at UBC says your platform is written in pixie dust. Can you at least be honest with British Columbians? What are you going to cut? How deep are the cuts going to be in the review that you've proposed? And I know you've started with childcare for the middle class, getting rid of support for them. But what else is on the chopping block in the Rustad administration?
Sonia, first of all, thanks very much. And $24 billion is not responsible. They have no hope at all to get back to a budget. They have no hope whatsoever to get back to a balanced budget. But here's another thing that David Eby and his government has done. They have put the cart before the horse. They're promising to do things like net zero by 2030. They're promising to do heat pumps. They're promising to do electric cars, but we don't have electrical generation. Last year, almost 20% of the electricity we actually needed had to come from outside of borders, from things like natural gas and coal-fired. We need to do significant investments in our power generation ability in this province, something that he has ignored as a government, to be able to make sure that we can actually come close to even doing any of these things. But the key piece in my mind is when 1 in 2 youth are thinking about leaving this province, if we do not get our economy going, those people will leave here. That's a brain drain. But most importantly, as parents want their children to stay close to home. They want to see a future for them.
We've had generations of politicians come to the public in election time and say, we're going to give you a tax cut, we're going to give you a rebate. The NDP themselves have given rebates that have amounted to over billions of dollars, instead of spending that money on ways to systemically solve problems. You know, it would be really helpful for people if there was transit available. Per capita, people spend $10,000 to own and operate a vehicle. If they had the option of available, frequent, fast, and free transit, that could save people $10,000 a year. People want to know that a healthcare system is there for them. People want to know that their kids are getting an excellent education system. People want mental health care. People want infrastructure. People want affordable housing. Tax cuts and rebates are a way that politicians and political parties try to woo people during elections, and then they turn their back on them for the 4 years after that election and fail to deliver what people need that will actually make their lives more secure and more affordable.
Well, I think, Sonia's clear, and that's the discipline of a costed platform. She's going to increase taxes on certain groups. That's her plan.
For the wealthy.
And
for the
I'm clear.
wealthiest
I
in
understand,
the province.
Sonia. I understand. But for us, we have a costed platform that includes immediate support for you and your family, for the middle class. But John, you said a lot there. But the one thing you studiously avoided saying was where your costed platform. How can we debate you when you won't even say what you're going to cut? Are you cutting healthcare? Cutting childcare? You said you're doing a review. We've seen this movie before when you were in government.
$3.8 billion to healthcare funding over time. David Eby keeps on calling it lie. But here's something David Eby is not telling you he's going to do. He's going to double your carbon tax over the
How about the carbon tax?
He is going to double
committed to get rid of the carbon
tax.
tax.
They're both getting rid of the carbon tax. That's
Oh
right.
yeah. Oh my
Half the
gosh.
people
Now
this
they're in
province are
unison
struggling
on
to
it.
put food on the table and pay their rent. And his goal is to tax you even further into poverty.
This is
Taxing
the worst
people
kind
in
of
poverty
diversion.
is
John,
not
where
going to
is your
change the
costed
weather,
platform?
Mr. Eby. Taxing people in the
Where's
weather
your
is
costed
not going
platform?
to change the weather. And we will be
costed
releasing
platform
the full
and the
costing
climate
of our
denier.
platform.
You rarely see
But the
those
key
two
piece that
things
we need to
together.
see is the economic development to make sure we can pay for these things.
This is why we're stuck in the 20th century.
And this is where we have to wrap this section of the debate. We have time now for a final round, which will not be a debate. I want each of your answers individually.
Well, they talk about
People
the kids.
who vote for opposing candidates are often friends, colleagues, even spouses in the same household. But at times, each of your campaign's rhetoric has cast the other side as woke, fragile, extreme, or yes, even weird. I would invite you all now to take a moment to personally reflect. Tell us how you yourselves have contributed to an increasingly polarized political climate. And most importantly, help us understand why you're doing that. We will start with Mr. Eby.
Well, I regret that we're having to have a debate about a bunch of very polarizing topics. These are topics that used to be settled for British Columbians for a generation. Climate change is real. Vaccines work. We don't call gay people groomers. We respect people. We respect Indigenous people.
Guy.
We don't promote hate and division.
Gays against groomers.
And I regret that I have to continually talk about these things because John Rustad has fielded candidates that promote these views, that he himself also seems to hold some of these views. I would much rather be talking about the fact that he doesn't have a costed platform, the fact that our tax benefit for people is available immediately, that we're building affordable housing. I don't want to be talking about this stuff. I want to talk about what matters to you at home, but it's important that you know who's on his team, who the next health minister could be, who's making decisions about what your kids learn in school. This is important information, and I regret that we have to talk about it.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. We've been actually clear in this campaign that we are talking about the issues. We're talking about the solutions. We're talking about the fact that people are dying on our streets. We're talking about the fact that our healthcare system is collapsing. We're talking about the fact that our economy is in shambles. We're talking about the fact that crime is running rampant. These are the things that the people are concerned about. David Eby wants to talk about conspiracy theories and anything but what's actually going on, because he cannot defend his government's policy. 7 years, can anybody say that anything is better in British Columbia? Is anything better?
Exactly.
Certainly, I haven't been able to find anybody to say that there is. As a Conservative government, we're trying to bring common sense change to British Columbia so that we can unleash the potential of our economy, so that we can make sure people can have a good paying job, that people can have a roof over their head, put food on the table, look after their kids, and their kids can look optimistically about being able to have a future in British Columbia, not looking out the window and seeing people lying on a street.
Ms. Firstenow.
I've really worked hard and been determined in this election to focus on solutions for people, to offer a well-being framework as a way to measure the work of government, to ensure that we're talking about reality and the solutions that we have to some really challenging and complex problems. Polarization is increased in two-party systems. Polarizations happens when parties have to define each other as the opposite of one another. We lose the common ground. The least polarized we were in BC was during the minority government from 2017 to 2020, when we worked together, particularly in response to the global pandemic. It was recognized that we were a province that could work together because we'd been doing that for 3 years. If we want less polarization, if we want more focus on solutions, we have to get away from a winner-takes-all two-party system. We have to elect enough Greens to prevent that from happening.
Leaders, we're running out of time. It is time for closing statements. Each of you will have a minute. There was a draw. According to the draw, Ms. Firstenow, you are up next. Please go ahead.
We have so much incredible potential in this province. We have people who are innovators, who are dreamers, who are entrepreneurs, young people who want to be part of the solutions to the big challenges we face, who want to go to university, become tradespeople, build the BC that is possible, a BC of clean energy, a BC of fairness and more equality, a BC where people aren't left behind, left to sleep on the street. We have so many solutions that we could be implementing, and yet our politics and our governance gets caught up in exactly this, in the polarization, in the pointing fingers, and in not acknowledging the reality of where we're at. In this election, electing more Greens, ensuring we don't give all the power to either of these parties is the way to move us forward as a province in a way that puts you, the people of BC, first.
Mr. Eby.
Thanks. If you're watching at home right now, it's not because there's nothing else on TV. It's because you care about this place, our amazing home. Sonia's right. The thing that makes British Columbia amazing is the people of British Columbia. And they need support right now. People are hurting. And that's our focus, is to make sure we're supporting British Columbians with a chance to own a home. 300,000 middle-income homes across the province with the healthcare they deserve. Making sure we're getting those doctors and nurses off of the sidelines and into our hospitals, delivering care in our communities, more family doctors for people. Making sure our communities are safe and responsive to the needs of you and your family. The people who are struggling in our streets are cared for in a compassionate way, and they get the care that they need. Now, John Rustad wants to throw that all away. We can't govern through conspiracy theories, cuts, and divisiveness. We only solve this together, and I'm committed to work for you until the job is done.
Mr. Rustad.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the listeners, thank the viewers for participating, for seeing this night, for watching, and for caring about British Columbia. I care deeply about this province too. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have a future here. I care about the fact that our youth want to be able to have safety here. You know, we have a government that kicks out a Jewish cabinet minister, Selena Robinson, to appease a mob who last night was burning flags in front of the art gallery. I find that incredibly offensive. In British Columbia, we want to make sure we build that positive opportunity for people to have that future. It's why our entire plan is about putting you first, whether it's healthcare and patients first, whether it's our economy and making sure you can build a job, whether it is the investments that are needed for infrastructure. I'm a proud Canadian, and I can tell you the Conservative Party of British Columbia will bring forward a common sense plan that will deliver real prosperity for everyone here in British Columbia. Thank you for watching this evening.
Okay, leaders, thank you. Thank you for a respectful debate this evening. On behalf of the Broadcast Consortium, we hope you at home have been helped and aided as you get to know the leaders, the parties, and their platforms. Election Day is October 19th. You can vote in advance starting this Thursday, October 10th, and you can request a mail-in ballot right now. Go to elections.bc.ca for all the information you need. On behalf of everyone, good night.
Well, we lost Drea, but that's okay because I will read a special message from our friends at Rumble now that the debate is, I was going to say mercifully over, but I found it quite interesting, and sometimes I don't. So the message is from Positive. If you have a dog, and we do in my home, she's under the desk right now, as she tends to be when I work. We've all been there. Our pup goes from full of energy to sick and miserable in an instant and at the worst of times. Then we're calling vets in the middle of the night or on the weekends trying to find a clinic that will take us in. It's a terrible way to manage your dog's health, not to mention your stress levels, and your monthly budget. That's why people are getting the Pet Emergency Kit by Positive. It contains critical medications and supplies that can not only keep you out of the veterinary office, but may even save your dog's life. Their kit contains critical medications like activated charcoal, styptic powder, and more. Save your dog's life. Head over to positive.com and use the code STUDIO to get 15% off your pet emergency kit. Do we have Drea back, or am I flying solo? Oh, okay. Well, I have to fly solo without my BC-based reporter, but good thing your buddy Sheila took a bunch of notes. So one thing I wanted to touch base with was this allegation that the Conservative Party of British Columbia is somehow anti-Indigenous for encouraging Indigenous independence and prosperity. Drea put in the Slack channel this it's a soundbite from Chris Sankey. Now, for those of you who don't know, Chris Sankey is an Indigenous businessman, and he is also the North Coast Haida Gwaii Conservative candidate in British Columbia. It's the last one there from Drea. If you wouldn't mind running that, Olivia, please.
John's policy embraces Indigenous culture. It embraces self-sufficiency. It embraces independence so that we don't have to rely on government assistance or EI or welfare. That's not who we are. Much like rural Canada, Indigenous people think the same way. We hunt, we fish, we trap. We're about culture and religion and family and environment. We take care of each other. That's who we are. And that's the conservative movement. We're not about this divisiveness. We're supposed to be we, not an us versus them. That's not how this should be. And that's not how I'm running my campaign. And I want to see every British Columbian benefit of the opportunities that the Conservative Party is going to bring forward.
Since 2017, the NDP's approach has had disastrous.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting during the debate to listen to two well-kept white people to tell the Indigenous candidates in John Rustad's party that they're getting it all wrong.
Yeah.
And it was just an odd thing to see. Strong Kamala Harris vibes in all of this from David Eby, who nobody coached him on his debate posture whatsoever. Like, he's turning and he would stare.
Yeah.
And then he would turn and he would stare. And it's like, no, just look straight ahead. Nobody wants to look at your eagle nose side profile. Just stare kind of with a neutral face. Otherwise, you just seem like a weirdo, like a Tim Walz weirdo.
It was very weird. And then the camera had to shift to keep up with them. Very
to keep
bizarre.
them in frame. It was just like, did nobody coach you on how you're supposed to appear? But what I said at the very beginning remains true. There's no possible way that David Eby can run from his own track record. The man has been in charge for 7 years. People are worse off. Drug addiction's out of control. Half the drug deaths in the country are in British Columbia. Homelessness is rampant. And he's saying, do you know what? Forget the fact that we've been in charge and drove the place into the ground. Wouldn't you think it would be great if you would let us be the ones to fix it? He's going back to John Rustad's track record when he was in a completely different party 14 years ago and saying, how can you trust him to do it? And it's like, wait a minute, you're in charge right now and the place is a mess. How can we trust you to fix it? And I'm so glad that John Rustad got around to pointing that out.
Yeah, that was the main thing that was sticking out to me is this. And that's part of why he's deflecting too and doing this smear campaign thing, because it deflects from the fact that he hasn't done the things that he's promising to do. And one of the things that stood out, my jaw almost hit the ground because I didn't know that, if true, that only 1% of our crates are being checked when they're coming into the ports. No wonder 50% of the drug overdoses deaths are happening in BC. That is shocking how anybody can be in government and see that stat and not say that something needs to be drastically changed. I couldn't believe that.
The CBSA is too busy hassling the Amish to focus on the ports. Come on. Another thing that stuck out to me is, like David Eby complaining about the healthcare system, the one that he oversees, and he's complaining, how dare anybody criticize Public Health Officer Bonnie Henry, peace be upon her.
Oh my gosh.
She's just an unelected bureaucrat. She's not God. You can criticize her. And, when he's talking about how nobody has a doctor and the healthcare wait times, blah, blah, quit firing people over their vaccine status, you jerk.
Well, and all of that is, all of these failings, our dying healthcare system that is in such dire state is under him and Dr. Bonnie Henry that they keep propping up. And even Sonia Firstino, she also brought up Bonnie Henry and defended her too and said, you're not implementing, she said this to Eby, you're not implementing her recommendations. May I remind you, that's only her latest recommendations that was so close to the election. That's why I think the NDP didn't enforce it. But it was absolutely nuts to address and expand the safer supply experiment instead of pulling back. And she wanted to have drugs, hard drugs like crack and heroin, just being available at the grocery store is what it sounded like, with no barriers, no professionals that you have to go see and talk to, no offer for treatment. And there's going to be little kids waiting outside for their safer supply overdose. So that's what the NDP finally said no to. And you can see Sonia Firstino actually saying she basically thinks you should blindly, I guess, keep listening to Bonnie Henry. I will say there were a couple of things that Sonia Firstino said that I do agree with. One is I did look into her talking about the village. I think it's called the Village something. Sorry, I forgot the full name of it. But it is a multi-pronged approach to helping individuals who are struggling with maybe co-occurring disorders such as substance abuse and mental health. And I agree, we do need to see more of that. But that also sounds like what John Rustad is proposing to bring more of in this effort to crack down on all decriminalization, to crack down on the safer supply that isn't safe at all, that has been diverted into the hands of kids, and to go ahead and get rid of the tent cities. So I agreed with that one. I also agreed that I think it would be a good idea to see a cap. Again, Canada is the most expensive for rent. And according to Sonia Firstino, in North America, I knew BC was in Canada. And she said putting a cap on rental increase between tenants. And I think that there is something to it, because there are a lot of people who are losing their homes being told they can't rent, and then somebody else rents with a way higher increase. So
can I Can
two
I tell you
things.
why I think that's a terrible idea? That's how you
Sure.
end up with fewer landlords. So
Yes.
if the government is telling me how much I can or can't increase rent, and I've got to bear the cost of increased electricity, carbon tax, property taxes. Let's say my property taxes jump 25%. I can't eat that. I have to be able to pass it on to somebody. So what happens is you just have fewer landlords. And so if people can't qualify for a mortgage, then there's no housing for them. There's no housing out there for them. And then you end up with now fewer supply on the market, rental properties on the market, because we've told landlords you just have to eat this cost. What does that do to the cost of rental properties? Way up, right?
It goes
You've
way
filled
up.
the supply. Yeah. So you often think it's good in theory, but then you have to think about all the things that go into being a landlord. And if you own a house, it gets more expensive year by year by year. And if you're a landlord, you just can't eat that, right? Then you lose your own house.
Yeah, there needs to be something in the middle there for sure.
Well, maybe you need to justify your rental increases.
Yes, explain
maybe
why
it's
it
as
is.
simple as that. Like justify your rental increases over a certain percentage. There was one thing that I thought was quite comical is when David Eby said, to take the burden off the public health care system in BC, you know what we were doing? We were sending people to Washington. To the private healthcare system.
For private healthcare. That was
I'm
hilarious.
like, so the private healthcare system was there bickety bam for you? Yeah, I would love that. Thank you very much. Yes. A reliable healthcare system that could address your problems right away without wait times. Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, I'm sure some of the people, including some that I've interviewed who have had to deal with cancer and had to flee Canada to get care, were just so enraged by that statement. And it's not that the government is helping a lot of those people. Some of those people are going on their own dime, spending everything they have and losing everything. I interviewed one couple, they literally, the wife, basically they broke out of the hospital because they felt like it was killing the wife. And then across the border, they saved her life very quickly and swiftly. So it was hilarious when he said that, but I'm sure not so hilarious from them. Something else that stood out to me was just the lies. Like, honestly, it's just, there is so much propaganda. We played that little clip of the Haida Gwaii candidate for the Conservative Party of BC, Chris Sankey, talking about the economic reconciliation that he thinks would make First Nations more prosperous and less dependent on the government. Well, right after that, what did David Eby do? Mr. Pro Indigenous start smearing Chris Sankey, of course, without showing his face, and kept claiming, I think I have a link in there about the VADES thing because he brought it up there. And I mean, how much time does John have to go in to try to, rebuttal that? But he keeps acting as though Chris Sankey said that the jab causes AIDS, which is not what happened at all. I did a whole thread about it. All he did was share an article that suggested it lowers the immune system. And so if you put V in front of that, and someone asked him what the acronym spelt out, and he spelt that out. But he even keeps just saying, you have a candidate who's saying that the jab, I think he's going to say it there. Let's play it real quick. It's short. 32
John,
seconds.
I'm going to ask you this question. You have a candidate on the North Coast. His name is Chris Sankey. He's tweeting out that COVID vaccines cause AIDS.
No.
So do you agree with your candidate's do you find that acceptable that your candidate would do that? How would you recruit? And I know, I just want to make sure that you know that this is a real thing. I'm going to pass you a copy of the tweet right there. And
Pause
how
it
do we
for a sec.
recruit?
Can we do it? Oh, I wanted to show everybody because when people are watching, they think if he says, I'm going to show you the tweet, that what he's saying is true, but it's still a lie. He's saying no Canadian should tolerate this. And you see, it's VADES. It's not AIDS. It's not the same thing. I read the whole article that's referred to, and they intentionally cut off the bottom where Chris Sankey explains what he's talking about. And so that is what David Eby has been spending so much time doing instead of explaining why he screwed up over the last 7 years.
Well, because you have to nuke Chris Sankey. You have to.
Yeah.
because he's the worst thing that ever happened to the NDP. An Indigenous businessman, an advocate for Indigenous wealth creation through business partnerships in oil and gas, and a conservative. And so they got to nuke his candidacy. You got to get rid of this guy because he pokes a hole in every lie you're trying to tell about John Rustad being anti-Indigenous. You got to get rid of him. So you have to even make stuff up, as the NDP are tending to do right now. I'm glad they touched on the BC Green Party candidate whose name escapes me. You forgot she was there quite a bit, honestly, until she said something like, "Oh yeah, there's another lady here."
Yeah.
Shoot, she's here. What did she call LNG? Liquefied natural gas, which burns to water vapor, right? Like heat and water vapor. She said that it is worse than coal. Okay, well, let us get back on coal. That'd be fine. Sure. Okay, have it your way. Put us back on coal, crazy lady. That's just fine. She basically says no fossil fuel development whatsoever. Another shocking fact I learned about BC today: 1 in 2 young people want to leave. Alberta's calling. And the
old
largest
people too.
That's the problem. You've got an aging retired population, as John Rustad points out, and all the young people want to leave. So guess who's going to be footing the bill for everything? Look in the mirror, sister, because everybody else is going to be retired and getting poor health care, except insofar as they might get shipped off to Bellingham, and everybody else is moving to Alberta, 1 and 2. That's a demographic disaster for British Columbia.
One thing I thought that would come up is the NDP, both provincially and federally, always talks about this the $10 sort of plan for childcare and how they've done that. A shocking stat that came out, I'm surprised Rustad didn't mention it. He's been mentioning it on X, but the UBC said that David Eby has been walking around and saying, "Oh yeah, we made it so affordable for moms and things like that to get this $10 a day childcare." And the UBC data that's come out with that promise that he's been propping up is that only 17 moms have gotten that this whole time. I was like, "What? Only 17 moms?"
That's
since
like
that
one
promise has
daycare's
been up.
worth.
17 moms. So Rustad claims he's going to further expand that.
Let's talk about Chip Wilson.
Yeah, okay. It's like my favorite thing to talk about.
I know. Let's talk about Chip Wilson, because I'm so pleased that he came up in the debate. Chip Wilson is rich enough to be cantankerous, which someday I hope to be. He is basically uncancelable. For those people who don't know, he's the Lululemon founder who once said that perhaps the pants at Lululemon are see-through because your butt might be too big. And he doesn't make pants for bigger people. I don't wear yoga pants, but I would consider wearing yoga pants in support of Chip Wilson, because he put up a sign that's anti-NDP on his house, which is like the most expensive house in British Columbia. So you can do that sort of stuff when you're that wealthy. You went out to check it out. But I'll turn this over to you, because I can't get enough of Chip Wilson's orneriness.
Well, and it's not ending. It's still an ongoing story. I haven't even gotten a chance to follow up. So you can see the sign there. Evie will tell you the Conservatives are far right, but neglects to tell you that the NDP are communists. So as you said, this is I think it's an $81 million oceanfront home on Point Grey Road in David Eby's riding, which is extra hilarious.
That's chef's kiss right there.
Yes. And so do we have, I think I might have sent the link of how Eby responded to that, but if not, I can just repeat it. He basically said, well, when you can have the Red Hot Chili Peppers perform your birthday, then you're out of touch. But the reality is that, of course, this man is loaded for sure. However, he has created so many jobs through his businesses.
Right. And how much tax has that man paid?
how much tax has he paid? He's created so many jobs. He's a philanthropist. He's donated so much money to British Columbia specifically. He encourages and helps teach others to start their own businesses successfully. And let's not forget, like, we vilify, or not we, a lot of people will vilify these billionaires, but at the same time, they're the ones like who are employing most people when they start these little companies and things like that. Yeah, they're employing the people. Now, I will say here, I was a little well. First, let's show what happened to the sign, because of course the NDP supporters came out, and that sign could not last long. So, do we have the picture? This is, I think I sent the video. Nope. If you scroll down, there's the video of what happened after. Of course, it was graffitied up with some foul language, and it's a video of EB's electoral contender. I'd have to send it to you, but basically they spray painted it with "FU Chip," and they actually spray painted his home as well, like on the side of the house, because of course, the radicals came out to try to put
more
it up. But
mischief than the convoy again. More mischief than the convoy.
Exactly. And Chip didn't care. He just put up another sign. Like right away, like he's got all this money, so he puts up this
love
other
this
sign.
rich curmudgeon so much.
Yeah. And it says, now the sign, I have it in the thread too. I shared it earlier, but
Olivia
it says,
had it up.
Oh, did you? It says, voters seem to forget when EB gives us money, it is the voters' money he has already taken. So, yeah, in between that, there was all this vandalism. So it's kind of funny. And we should say, like, I reached out to Chip and he didn't get back. He hasn't really made a statement.
He'll just put up a sign.
Yeah, he hasn't made a
have to make
statement.
sign.
So technically, it could be somebody else. Oh, there you go. There's some of the damage. It could be someone else. So I should say that somebody else who has access to his property, but it's probably Chip. But I will point out, Rustad kind of, I was a little disappointed to see his tweet. I think I shared that as well. I think it's the last
I saw
link.
his tweet and I was like, I think that someone should take his phone away. I don't think he read. Like, I don't think he got what the scare quotes were around gives. Like, I think that he'd sort of missed the point. And there were a lot of people in the thread correcting John, saying, John, stop. This is friendly fire.
Yeah, he said something like, sorry, Chip. Basically, we're not on the same page. And it's like, yeah, no, like you said, everybody's kind of correcting him on that.
Chip doesn't want, Chip didn't want the government to give anybody money.
Yeah.
He also doesn't want the government to take any more of his money. I think John just sort of misinterpreted what Chip was trying to say, because it was like, yeah, sorry, there's no handouts for billionaires from us or something like that. And it's like, that's not, I'm pretty sure Chip never asked anybody for money. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. Sorry, Chip, a Conservative Party of BC government isn't going to give billionaires special tax rates. That's not what he asked for. You're excluded from our homeowners and renters rebate, like he needs it. I'm fighting to make life more affordable for hardworking, everyday BCers, not billionaires. And if you watch an interview with Chip done by the the Canadian Tax Federation, I think that's the right name.
The CTF, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation,
Yes, thank you. Chip talks about how these socialist governments like the NDP keep putting money into areas that make it harder for businesses to succeed. And again, businesses, especially small businesses, are the backbone. They collectively employ over 95% of Canadians across the country. We need businesses to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time a poor person gave you a job? Honestly, well, maybe Ezra. At this point, but I mean, don't go around attacking job creators. And you know what? I hope he puts up another sign. It'll be better than those weird signs they put outside of the United Church.
Oh gosh,
that are just heresy. Do we have? We should encourage people. I haven't checked lately if we have any chats, but if people want to have their say, I think we're going to go till about 9:30 my time, 8:30 Drea's time, because I've been in front of my computer now for 14 hours straight, 14 and a half hours straight.
11:30 for our producers, Ephraim and Olivia.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, guys.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can chat at Rumble.
Yeah, if you're on Rumble watching this, sorry, if you're on YouTube, that's a censorship platform. Abandon that. Head on over to Rumble, where you can leave a Rumble rant and have your say. If there's something you noticed in the debate that you think the world needs to hear, go ahead, leave a Rumble rant. If it's over the $5 US cutoff, we'll read it on air. We've got one message from Patriot Pay. Okay, that's great.
Nice. Thank you.
Patriot Pay. I want to take a moment to talk about an app called Patriot Pay. Oh, by Steve Bannon. If you've been curious about crypto and thought it was too complicated, that is me. 100%. This app makes it super simple. Okay, this is for me. We're reading this together and we're learning together. With Patriot Pay, you can buy, sell, trade, and even send money to friends, all in crypto. It's like Venmo, but for digital currency. And the best part is you're in full control of your money with no banks involved. Oh, the banksters are cut out of the equation. Plus, it's all about building a patriot economy where we support businesses and causes that align with our values. And who knew? Perhaps Lululemon aligns with my values. Whether you're just starting out or want to explore more about crypto, Patriot Pay is secure, easy to use, and perfect for beginners. That's me. Check it out at app.patriotpay.org or download the Patriot Pay app in app stores today. So app.patriotpay.org. Okay, I got it. We've got a couple of unpaid chats from Rocky Mountain Duke. Said Sheila was so over this debate, which I was getting there, but I'm also over this day. So don't misjudge my lack of enthusiasm for the debate. It's a cumulative thing that's piling up on me right now. And somebody, Ms. Stacey Lynn says, the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. Former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. You know what? I also thought it was very Reagan-esque for John Rustad to put the Rustad rebate, like to put his name in that, because Reagan's theory of economics was widely known as Reaganomics. So I thought that was like a cute turn of phrase to sort of brand the rebate as his. We had something similar in Alberta called Ralph Bucks, when we ended up having our debt all paid down. And then we ended up in surplus. Surplus means the government took too much of your money. And so our beloved Ralph Klein, again, peace be upon him, he said, we took too much money and sent us all checks in the mail. And we called them Ralph Bucks. Every man, woman, and child in the province got a rebate of a few $100.
Well, and let's not forget, not everybody's on X. And in British Columbia, a lot of people don't come out to vote for the provincial election. So when it's time to campaign, you want people to remember who you are. And so when you put your name in it, that helps a lot. But I guess we should talk about, and maybe people can weigh in the Rumble chats as well, who do we think won the debate? I mean, I'll start with you, Sheila. I don't know. I tried to watch it in a way where, I'm taking my own thoughts out to see who won. And I almost feel like it's a tie. Like, I don't know that there was a clear winner if you look at it that way.
I don't know. If you watch with the sound off and you read the body language, John Rustad won.
Absolutely.
For sure. David Eby just came across like a weirdo. Like I said, like a Tim Walz. It was just weird expressions on his face, couldn't stand still, going back and forth instead of looking at the camera with the neutral expression. If you watch it with the sound off, he completely lost. John Rustad won. I forget the lady's name, which, and I'm a close political watcher, but that's how I know she lost. Because I don't even remember her name. Yeah. And I appreciate how Rustad remained calm. And he never got sidetracked. He didn't get baited in to certain things that you could tell David Eby was really sort of trying to drag him off message. And he remained like laser focused on affordability, crime, opioids, all the healthcare system that is failing, all the things the NDP have been in charge of for the last 7 years. He never got sidetracked from those issues, which I thought meant that he won the debate.
And I like that when Eby was looking at him, almost breathing down his neck, he didn't make eye contact with Eby even once. I'm sure he must have felt that Eby was doing that.
Weird.
And when he would be, when he was getting interrupted by Eby, he also never broke his speech, which was interesting. He just kind of like you said, just calmly kept talking. And that was interesting as well. Evie, on the other hand, again, if you were someone who's just tuning in, you don't really follow much and you don't know who's who much about the other people. I mean, Evie, some say he's unelected the way he even got in. He was just kind of chosen, wasn't much competition. He uses the same words, those emotional words. We're going to keep people safe and all of these things that really try to feed with the person's heart. But I think that type of rhetoric has been so used and abused that a lot of people are like, we've heard this before.
It's how we got Justin Trudeau. It's how we got Justin Trudeau. He was Mr. I'm going to grow the economy from the heart outward. He literally said that. And I don't know why the soccer moms in Ontario were like, well, that's the guy for us. And that's how we got stuck with him for 9 years.
Absolutely. But Rusted, on the contrast, did a lot of personal stories. He talked about not being able to have kids. That makes him likable and relatable. He talked about 3 of his family members passing away in the year of 2020 after, you know what, but he talked about that. And he also talked about the personal stories of, the boy. Well, I guess he was 28 years old when he passed away, but the struggle that happened. So that helped Rusted on that way. But Evie, I thought his best moment was when he really was pressing. I don't know why I'm holding my lip gloss. I'll put that down. He really was pressing John Rusted to say, how are you going to make your promises happen? And I agree with Rusted. We are a resource-rich province, and that has been neglected severely. So we do have to put these things in place to be more prosperous and to be able to offer to people. But I think that the moment where EB kept pressing him on him was his best moment in particular.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say neglected. I would say that your resource-based economy has been absolutely kneecapped and restrained by NDP policies. I know we should wrap up the stream because it is very
8:30.
Yeah, it's so very, very late for Efron and Olivia behind the scenes. We've got a chat here from Rocky Mountain Duke, whose free chat I read. It says, thank you both. Great stream. Rustad is the clear winner in the debate despite the 3-on-1 CBC format. Ask Trump if that sounds familiar. Yeah, there was some. Although I thought maybe the questions were actually quite fair. You always expect a lean towards the left in these debates from the moderator. And we got that for sure, but I thought it was more fair than I expected.
At first, her first question to Rusted, I thought, oh no, this isn't going to be good. But then you're right. It got fair.
It straightened out. So we've got a bunch of free chats here that I think we should read just because we asked the question. Momac11 says, you two are admirable. Love what you do. Drea, saw you a few weeks back and I wanted to say hi, but decided to just let you do your shopping. I'm thankful for you. That's
really?
Cute.
You can say hi next time.
Yeah, this is why I'm always conscious of, well, it's not true because I frequently leave the house looking like an absolute potato. And that's the day that somebody is like, is that you? They'll say like, do I know you? And I'm like, you definitely don't. And then they're like, Sheila, like, yes, it is me.
I'm like, how do you recognize me?
I know. Like, I look like a goblin today, but yeah, that's always the time somebody recognizes me. H1R086. Saying Rust at 1 is like saying a NASCAR driver won against 2 unpowered bumper cars. Crazy Nuck says, I think this is a great point. I think the flag burning last night and death to Canada chants cost the NDP a lot of votes, share far and wide. I think that's true. I think it is true. Those are NDP voters.
That's scary. It needs to cost the government that hasn't even condemned it yet, the election. I would hope so.
Yeah. Icon Matrix says if Wexit went ahead, so Alberta leaving, or the West leaving, so our friends in Saskatchewan, if Wexit went ahead, would we actually want an NDP BC to join? Can we take everything up to Chilliwack? And refugees? Let's take some refugees.
Leave me. Please don't.
No, we'll evacuate you. We'll do like a helicopter lift, and then we'll just District 9 the rest of the place. I'm fine with that.
Out of a 15-minute city. I'll have to break out.
That cowboy interior, very culturally compatible with us Albertans. I feel right at home there. We would want most of BC to join. We definitely want oil and gas country. Fort St. John, How are they not just Grand Prairie West? I don't know. I think they basically are. I think that's everything. If we're all wrapped up on the chat, Drea, I'll let you close up the show.
All right. Well, thank you for everybody who tuned in. That was a good debate, but the real nail biting comes on the election, October 19th. This is a neck and neck race, perhaps the tightest race British Columbia has ever seen, and people have a clear choice, the left or the right. So I will be continuing to cover everything very closely, and I already have lots of reports up at our special website called bcdecides.com. Thank you so much, Sheila Gunn-Reid. Always a pleasure to be on the live with you. Bye, everyone. Oh, and our producers, thank you so much, of course, for still being awake, for not falling asleep on the keyboard.